Good afternoon. Welcome to the 123rd meeting of the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs. For members' information, today's meeting is being televised. As we continue our study of Bill C-76, an act to amend the Canada Elections Act and other acts to make certain consequential amendments, we're pleased to be joined by the Honourable Karina Gould, Minister of Democratic Institutions. She is accompanied by officials from the Privy Council Office, Manon Paquette, Senior Policy Advisor, and Jean-François Morin, Senior Policy Advisor. Thank you, Minister Gould, for coming back, and I'll turn the floor over to you for some opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Chair, and to the committee for inviting me here again. I'm delighted to be back with my officials to look into C-76 before you start your clause-by-clause study of the legislation. I'd like to thank you for your commitment to study Bill C-76, the Elections Modernization Act, and I truly appreciate the hard work you've already put into studying this pivotal piece of legislation, one that will, I believe, help strengthen our electoral laws and safeguard our future elections at the federal level here in Canada. Notre gouvernement est déterminé à renforcer.
Our government is determined to reinforce democratic institutions in Canada and to re-establish Canadians' trust and their participation in our democratic process.
Our democracy depends on the participation of as many Canadians as possible. I also firmly believe that the Elections Modernization Act is the right piece of legislation to make our electoral process more accessible for all Canadians. Cette loi réduira les obstacles à la participation.
This bill will reduce obstacles to participation which Canadians face when they try to participate in the electoral process in general. Whether a Canadian is abroad or in the Canadian forces, at university, or not, or without fixed address, they have to face certain obstacles to vote.
Means making voting easier for more Canadians. Restoring the option of vouching for another eligible Canadian means making voting easier for more Canadians. Voting is a right, and it is our responsibility to make voting accessible to as many Canadians as possible. Avec le projet de loi C-76.
With Bill C-76, we are extending accommodation measures to include all handicapped individuals, not only those who have a physical disability. This law will increase support for voting offices, polling stations, and they offer the possibility of voting at home for disabled Canadians.
Difficult to participate in political campaigns because campaign material in offices are not accessible. Bill C-76 will encourage political parties and candidates to accommodate electors with disabilities by creating a financial incentive through reimbursement of expenses related to accommodating measures. For example, this would include sign language interpretation during an event and making the format of material more accessible. Cette loi modifie également les dépenses électorales pour que les candidats handicapés.
The bill also amends electoral expenses for those who have candidates that are disabled or young members who wish to participate. It will allow candidates to use their own funds as well as campaign funding to pay for expenses linked to their disability, child care, or other pertinent expenses linked to home care or other health cares. These will be reimbursed up to 90%.
Protecting and defending our democracy. The Elections Modernization Act will make it easier for our soldiers, sailors, and air personnel to participate in our democracy. It allows our CAF members the same flexibility as other Canadians in choosing where to cast their ballot, whether it be to vote at regular polls where they reside in Canada, to vote abroad, to vote at advanced polls, or to vote in special military polls as they currently do. Beaucoup d'entre nous ont des électeurs de notre circonscription.
Many among us have electors in our ridings who have lived in Canada but now live abroad. Whether they are away for work or studies, Canadians living abroad have the right to participate in the democratic process and to express themselves on questions of interest.
Resident electors must have been residing outside Canada for fewer than 5 years. It will also remove the requirement that non-resident electors intend to return to Canada to resume residence in the future. This will extend voting rights to over 1 million Canadians who are living abroad. En tant que gouvernement fédéral, il nous incombe de faciliter le vote.
As federal government, we have a responsibility to facilitate the voting process for Canadians, including better experience on voting day and a better participation on election day.
Flexibility by increasing the hours of advance polls to 12-hour days. We will also streamline the intake procedures during regular and advance polls. Cette loi élargira également l'utilisation.
It was also widen the accessibility of mobile voting stations on voting day and for advanced polls to better serve communities which are either isolated or of low density. In order to allow Canadians to participate fully in their democratic right to vote, they have to know when and how to vote. Historically, Elections Canada has led a number of activities to educate Canadians as to the mandate and the administration of elections.
Government limited the Chief Electoral Officer's education mandate, removing the CEO's abilities to offer education programs to new Canadians and historically disenfranchised groups. Notre gouvernement croit que nous devrions donner aux Canadiens les moyens de voter.
Government believes that we should provide all Canadians the right to vote and participate in our democracy. We believe that the Chief Electoral Officer should be able to communicate with all Canadians in order that they may exercise this democratic right.
It's about providing electors with information related to the logistics of voting, like where, when, and how to cast a vote. We want Canadians to be ready for Election Day, no matter what political party they vote for. This also means preparing first-time voters. The creation of a register of future electors will allow Canadian citizens between the ages of 14 and 17 to register with Elections Canada. When they turn 18, they will automatically be added to the voters list. Alors que plus de jeunes ont voté en 2015 que lors des élections précédentes,
more young people voted in 2015 than compared to previous elections, 57 for the group 18 to 24 years of age. The number was less than what voted on other groups of age, 78%. This measure will allow young people to participate more fully in the democratic process.
Responsibility to ensure we maintain the trust of Canadians in our democratic process. The Elections Modernization Act will make it more difficult for elections lawbreakers to evade punishment by strengthening the powers of the Commissioner of Canada Elections and offering a wider range of tools for enforcement. En rendant le commissaire aux élections fédérales plus indépendant et en lui conférant de...
Providing a greater range of activity and freedom for the Commissioner for Federal Elections, we will make sure that the Electoral Act, he may in fact investigate the violations and continue to work to assure better security of our institutions.
Canada and reporting to Parliament through the Chief Electoral Officer rather than a senior member of Cabinet. Il aura également de nouveaux pouvoirs avec l'option.
Will also be granted further powers in order to allow the imposition of administrative pecuniary sanctions for violations of the Electoral Act, Electoral Expenses Act, and the third-party infractions. He will also be able to lay charges to the prosecution office and make orders to constrain witnesses, forcing them to testify.
$1 million over 5 years, beginning in 2019, to support the work of the Office of the Commissioner of Canada Elections. This funding will help ensure the Canadian electoral process continues to uphold the highest standards of democracy. De nombreux Canadiens s'inquiètent de l'impact et de l'influence de l'argent sur notre processus.
Many Canadians are worried about the impact and influence of money in the political process, and Bill C-76 will ensure that the process be more transparent and equitable. The pre-electoral period will begin on the 30th of June of the year to the date fixed of the dropping of the writ.
Of approximately $1 million adjusted to inflation, with a maximum of $10,000 per electoral district. This spending limit will include all partisan advertising, partisan activities, and election surveys. During the election period, there will be a spending limit of approximately $500,000 and a maximum of $4,000 per electoral district in 2019. This legislation will require third parties that spend more than $500 on partisan advertising and activities during the pre-writ and writ period to register with Elections Canada. Third parties will also be required to open a dedicated Canadian bank account and use identifying taglines on all partisan advertising. These measures will ensure greater transparency and provide Canadians with more information with respect to who is trying to influence their decision. Le gouvernement du Canada doit veiller.
The Government of Canada will ensure that our democratic institutions will be modern, transparent, and accessible to all Canadians. We are committed to reinforcing the trust of Canadians in our democratic process.
And the work of this committee, the Elections Modernization Act will improve Canadians' trust and confidence in Canada's electoral system. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Minister. And we'll start on welcome Ms. Elizabeth May, and I understand the Liberals are giving you speaking slot later, so
nice.
Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Chair.
And we'll start with Madame Lapointe.
Merci beaucoup.
7 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. And welcome, Madam Minister, and welcome to your officials that are accompanying you.
Le directeur général des élections.
I was listening quite closely as the Chief Electoral Officer appeared recently. How many Canadians are abroad who will be able to vote now, given the... they had been able to vote before. Can they vote? How many more will be able to vote this time? With the changes to this legislation, about 1 million Canadians will be able to exercise their vote once this legislation is adopted. So those who are military personnel and embassies abroad, officers, etc., working abroad, yes, that's correct. C-76, how would it make it easier for these individuals to exercise their right to vote? How will they be able to vote abroad, for example, as Stephanie, our colleague, my brother worked in the embassies for a number of years, and I know that a lot of expats have indicated it wasn't very easy to vote when one was not in Canada. Well, the process and procedures will not change radically for those who reside abroad. It will be the same provisions. They have to make proof of identity and vote. What will change is that they will not be obliged to return to Canada, and there are no limits as to their residencies abroad, for example. Those who are away from the country for more than 5 years will still maintain the right to vote from abroad. When I was stationed abroad, I witnessed 2 general elections, and I was able to vote in both times. I was in the United States for one, and in Mexico for the other, but I did have the right to vote. Okay, I'm quite pleased to hear that, because I'm glad to see that there's no more limit for residency periods abroad. I have another question on number 6. Since the 2016 election, the Chief Electoral Officer said that we did not do enough to control or constrain misleading advertising, that someone be induced in an incorrect fashion as to when or where to vote. A lot of misinformation can be spread in this fashion, and what can we do to control that? That is a very hot button item in this piece of law. Information which floats about in the public sphere. It's not up to Canadians to say which is the correct information and which is not correct information. We're not there to correct that. But on various social media platforms, for example, there will be some amendments made through this legislation to control or to enhance transparency for political advertising and for voting information. not only social media platforms, but in all forms of media. People have to know where to vote, and the author of this information will have to be clearly identified. It has to be transparent. That way they know at least who is trying to influence their voting options. So that could be civil society actors, individuals, if there are misleading information. If misleading information is provided, there are corrective measures to be applied through this bill. So there are some provisions in the Act which will sanction misleading information, and sanctions may be imposed in a variety of forms. It's going to be quite specific as to what is allowed and what is not allowed. And we have gained, or we will be granting more authority and power to the Commissioner for Federal Elections to investigate and to act consequentially to constrain this. You said earlier that there will be in this law that the commissioner will have new powers. He will be able to impose monetary sanctions. The commissioner of federal elections. This was proposed in the report following the last election to simplify and to to put some teeth behind the law itself. Yes, well, French is my second language, I'm sorry. Yes, various provisions then in this bill. And we have accepted some of the recommendations made in that report to enforce and enhance the capacities of the commissioner to ensure compliance with the law. Well, we will have to see how these new functions work in the course of the next election, and I'm very anxious to see what the next recommendations of the Commissioner and the Chief Electoral Officer will be in their next report. A few minutes left? About 45 seconds. All right. That's pretty short for one question, but I'll give it my best shot. I'm also interested in the comments you made on accessibility for disability, people with disabilities, POD. They can have someone vote by proxy on their behalf. Yes, there's a number of recommendations that were made by the Chief Electoral Officer based on committee study, and that a representative of a disabled person can in fact assist them in voting. We heard their problems, and we're trying to ensure that they can vote and with dignity. Yeah, because it's a very sad situation in many instances. Yes, thank you. Time's elapsed, I'm afraid. Thank you.
7 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, et merci, Madame la Ministre, pour être ici aujourd'hui.
Thank you very much for allowing me to participate today.
Advisor in PCO's Democratic Institutions Unit, which supports you, appeared before the committee this spring and suggested creating segregated bank accounts and fundraising practices for third parties' political activities. Why do you not support your former advisor's suggestion to implement this?
So in C76, we have actually proposed that third parties create a separate bank account for any activities with regards to funds that they intend to use for political activities in the pre-writ and during the writ period.
Okay, however, this is not created for all times, as you indicated. It's just specifically for the pre-writ and writ periods, therefore not specifically demonstrating the origination of funds.
That's also the case for political candidates as well. So you yourself, when you ran for office, you opened a separate bank account as a political candidate that was separate from your riding association or from the political party, and so it's in line with that practice.
Okay, so you are confirming that it's not for all times. Why would you say you do not support disclosure at any time for any purpose?
Could you repeat that?
Sure. Why do you not support disclosure of expenditures at any time for any purpose? So the clauses in the bill as it stands presently, it is not possible to entirely follow the inflow of money and the expenditure of money by these third parties at all times. So why do you not support disclosure at any time for any purpose?
Well, I think it's important to clarify what exactly a third party is. And third parties are anything that are not political parties or candidates. So that's an individual, that's civil society, that could be any group or individual in Canada. And so we believe that it's important that it should only meet that threshold when that individual or organization will be conducting political or partisan activities in the lead up to the campaign. Otherwise, I think that would be going too far into either people's personal lives or the activities of organizations that may not actually be participating in political activities. However, what C76 does do is require that if a third party is intending to participate either during the pre-writ or the writ period, that they must disclose all donations received in the lead up to that.
Thank you. The Chief Electoral Officer asked specifically for items in the bill related to anti-collusion, yet the measures and the amendments which were brought forward by the government deal only with third parties and not with all parties. Why is this so?
Well, it's with regards to third parties and political parties, which we think is very important. We also wanted to make sure, so for example, the New Democratic Party, if you're a member at the provincial level, you're also a member at the federal level, and we didn't want to, impede their ability to work as one party. So we tried to take and understand the Canadian landscape of political parties into the creation of this. So I think that's really important. But it is specifically there so that you don't have a third party colluding with a political party for those objectives.
Okay. In Bill C-76, you attempt to tackle foreign interference in Canadian elections. But let's take, for example, a hypothetical case where a foreign entity donates to a Canadian organization, let's say $1 million for administration costs. Then this organization, which had raised money for these costs, suddenly finds itself with this $1 million available to campaign in Canada. Can you confirm that this type of foreign funding and interference will remain legal despite Bill C-76?
So within Bill C-76, there is a blanket ban on using foreign funding for partisan activities during the pre-writ or political period. There are anti-circumvention rules within C-76 as well to ensure that this is not the case. However, it's important to recognize that we strongly believe that C-76 goes quite far with regards to doing our best to ensure that there is no foreign funding either at the third party or political party level in Canada.
Can you say with absolute certainty that you have done everything within your power as the Government of Canada to ensure that there is no foreign influence, be it at the social media level or at the funding level for Canadians?
Well, I think we should determine foreign influence versus foreign interference. Foreign influence is things that could be overt. So, for example, a foreign government saying, this is what we believe on a particular subject, and that's within the rules of diplomacy. Foreign interference would be the covert attempt to undermine Canadians' information or access to information or understanding of the results of the election. And I believe that C-76 does what's possible within the law to do our best to ensure that this does not happen. However, I think that what we've tried to do and what I've tried to do with C-76 is plan for the things that we know of, ensure that it's grounded in the values and the principles that are important for Canadians with regards to our elections. However, there could always be something that happens in the future that we are unaware of, but I think that this is a very robust framework and grounding to do our best to protect Canadian elections from foreign interference.
At the United Nations recently, your Prime Minister indicated that there was, I quote, not much foreign influence or interference in the last election here in Canada. In your opinion, how much is too much? Is not much too much? And do you feel that with Bill C-76, we will have no influence or interference entering the 2019 federal election?
So his comments were based on the Communications and Security Establishment report that was released in June 2017, which was the first time that a signals intelligence agency or any intelligence agency around the world had actually publicly examined and released information on foreign interference in elections around the world. And while there were low levels that were seen, they were not seen to have interfered in the election itself. However, Bill C-76 and other actions that are being taken in collaboration with the political parties in the CSE are all done so in a way to prevent and prepare Canadians for what could be an eventuality in 2019, or it could not. But I think that this is a very robust framework, as I've said, and I think it prepares and sets Canadians up well for 2019, and that we can have confidence in both our intelligence and security agencies, but also in our elections administration to do what they can to protect Canadian democracy.
Thank you,
Thank
Ms.
you,
Kusi.
Minister.
And now we'll go on to Mr. Cullen.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister, and her team for being here. I've got to say, I'm looking through the amendments that your government has moved to this bill, considering the track that has taken us here, that we're 700 days since you introduced Bill C-33, which was the original effort to get rid of the Unfair Elections Act. It's 5 months past the deadline that was set by Elections Canada to bring these changes to completion and into law. And it's some 2 years plus after the broken promise to make 2015 the last election under the first past the post system. I'm surprised because I thought there'd be more in here on things that your government and you personally have claimed to support, and that you seem unsupportive of things that I think would help. I think of the launch of the parliamentary session. The Prime Minister said to your caucus, and I'm quoting, "Add women, change politics is how we will make a better country." And one of the Liberal fundraising ads said, "Canada needs more women from diverse backgrounds making decisions in Ottawa, because when women succeed, we all succeed." And we have an amendment in here that is based upon a model that the Irish and other countries have used, that in their case increased the participation of women as candidates by 90% and helped elect 40% more women to their parliament. We're ranked 61st in the world right now, Minister. You know this, of course. 26% of the parliament is women, and at the current pace, as the Daughters of the Vote pointed out to the Prime Minister, it'll take 90 years to get to equity in our legislature. Yet you're planning to vote against an amendment that has been applied in other democracies to get us there. I don't know, did you get the IT alert that I did just recently from our IT service department here in Ottawa? It just happened a couple hours ago. It's an IT alert, Facebook data breach. You commissioned a report, delivered a report to you from the CSE, and I'm quoting from that report that said, "Almost certainly political parties and politicians and media are vulnerable to cyber threats and related influence operations." The Privacy Commissioner has said one of the ways to counter those threats to our democracy is to include political parties, under privacy rules. The BC Civil Liberties Association just wrote to you and said that the provisions on privacy are so inadequate as to be meaningless, and that the current Privacy Commissioner has said that Bill C-76, this bill, has nothing of substance when it comes to privacy. British Columbia has existed under these privacy rules for 15 years. Parties have been able to communicate effectively with voters. Europe's had it for 20 years, and they've been effectively able to communicate with their voters. We're proposing Sunday voting, which the former Chief Electoral Officer has promoted. That has increased in other democracies, voting by 6 and 7% increase in participation. I guess what I'm finding confusing about all of this is I'm trying to match the words and the rhetoric of your government with the actions when we now have an opportunity to do something about it. You've been in office for 3 years. Here's an opportunity in dealing with the rules that guide us as politicians that guide the electoral process. And I would think that one of your fundamental mandates was to increase the participation of women and diverse voices, yet your party has chosen to protect all incumbents, therefore ensuring the status quo. And the status quo should be unacceptable to everybody. That when we have amendments that would help more women become candidates, more women and diverse voices get actually elected, you want to vote against it. When we see the cyber threats and the cybersecurity issues that your own agency has identified after your request to investigate, this bill has nothing in it to increase protection of data and privacy. And when we asked the current Chief Electoral Officer when he was here testifying, what does he know about what the parties gather in terms of data of Canadians? He said, I have no idea. And your report says that we as political parties are vulnerable to attacks and that Canada as a country is susceptible to these attacks. And having watched Brexit, having watched the US elections, we have important and very recent examples of the reasons to strengthen privacy laws, and this bill has nothing in it. So after 700 days of introducing the first iteration of this bill, 5 months after passing over Elections Canada's deadline to say, get us to this place so we can introduce these changes, and after having made so many promises to women and diverse groups to do better, we're offering opportunities to do better through amendments that we've seen based on evidence that is in front of us. Your government claims to be evidence-based. We are using evidence to improve the things that your government and your party claim to want to improve, and you're choosing not to do them. My question is why?
How much time is left in? Okay, thanks. Thank you for all of your comments and your questions. With regards to cybersecurity, I mean, I think there are many things in this bill that are working to improve cybersecurity for Canadians and with our democracy. The other thing that I want to note is that the Communications and Security Establishment has reached out to political parties and is engaging with them to ensure that they have the best practices in place and is available to provide advice on an ongoing basis.
There's nothing that requires that. All of your bill says is parties have to post a policy somewhere on their website, and there's no consequence if they fail to keep the data safe.
Well, so there are a couple of points with regards to that. So this is the first time that we are requiring in legislation that political parties post a public privacy policy. And I would note that after this bill was introduced, the New Democratic Party, for example, updated their privacy policy that had been quite out of date, which I think you can see is a real tangible step in the right direction. And there are strong consequences if parties do not do that, in the sense that they will be deregistered as a political party.
All they have to do is post a policy.
On the other hand, there is also a requirement for political parties not to mislead Elections Canada, and that would come with very strong repercussions. And we are empowering the Commissioner of Elections Canada, if a complaint is made, to be able to do that investigation. So I think that these are really positive first steps, and I would really encourage the committee, if this is an issue that they think is of importance, to study it more deeply and more broadly.
You are not accepting efforts to help more women and diverse views get elected. Why not?
So in this legislation, I'm very proud of the fact that with regards to childcare and other care provisions for candidates, that we will now be reimbursing that at up to 90% if this legislation is passed, and also it will be outside of the total spend for what candidates have with regards to the election period. And this is really important because if it was within the spend limit, that would put someone who has care costs for a family member or a sick one to decrease their competitiveness with their competitors who may not have those costs. And they can also be reimbursed at a higher level. So there are some practical things in here that I think will encourage people of greater diversity to run.
So being able
I also think that all of us here in this room as leaders should be doing our part to encourage women to participate.
Maybe protecting incumbents wasn't such a great idea.
And our government has also recently announced, I think it was $4.5 million for the Daughters of the Vote, as well as support for equal voice, and really working to encourage and increase diverse participation.
Thank you, Minister. Now we'll go on to Ms. Hoda for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Some of those incumbents include women, Mr. Collins, so you could have things go the other way around. But anyways, my question, I also have some questions regarding Facebook, Google, Twitter, other social media. that has become very common to use for advertising for political purposes and during campaigns as well. Currently, we don't have, they keep records of advertisements, but after that advertisement is old and is no longer available, you no longer see any record of the advertising. Do you think when it comes to political advertising that there should be better recording, and how should that recording be made available? Should it be made available to the Chief Electoral Officer, or should it be made available publicly? What are your thoughts on that?
So I think absolutely it should be made available to both the Chief Electoral Officer but also to the Canadian public, because I think as we've seen in jurisdictions around the world and within their electoral experiences, that one of the key ways that foreign actors have attempted to interfere in the electoral process is specifically with regards to not disclosing that they are in fact the ones that are purchasing advertising on social media platforms. And so I think that a stronger transparency regime with regards to advertising on social media, but also on media more broadly, is also very important. And I think that, you know, it's really important that this this registry is available for a period of time following the election as well, so that if there are questions or there are complaints, that there is a public registry where people can go look, and where the commissioner can also take a look at what was advertised and how it was advertised.
Do you have any suggestions on what that period of time should be?
I think it should be, you know, for 2 to 5 years, because we would want to be able to go through an entire parliamentary process, I think.
Okay. When it comes to going back to some of the third-party spending and foreign investment into third parties, foreign money coming in for third-party spending here, do you think that, especially when it comes to, you know, social media platforms as well, even outside, I know this question was raised, but it was in a little bit of a different way, even outside of the writ period or the election period, if it is a foreign actor that's spending for political advertising, but it may not be during that particular length of time, which is the writ or the pre-writ, that should still be captured somehow?
Well, so this legislation would only deal with the writ and the pre-writ period, but I do think that more information is always better, and transparency is always the right policy to pursue, because I think that there are often times when Canadians may think that they are getting information from a domestic actor when in fact it could very well be coming from a foreign source. And so I think there is an onus on social media platforms to disclose that information, because it contributes to the domestic dialogue.
But you don't feel that it's the place of this legislation or the Chief Electoral Officer?
So this is the first time that we will be putting a pre-writ period into practice, should this legislation pass, which I sincerely hope that it does. And I think that it would be something that we would then have evidence to determine how that took place during the pre-writ and the writ period, and would provide further evidence for this committee or parliamentarians or Canadians or elections Canada to make further recommendations as to what else would need to be done. But it should be noted that foreign funding is banned at all times for anything that has to do with partisan purposes.
During the CEO's testimony at committee, the Commissioner of Elections Canada said that there's challenges of enforcement in the provisions of C-76 to prohibit organizations or individuals from selling ad space to any foreign entity. Ensuring enforceability is obviously key to keeping foreign actors outside of Canadian elections. Do you agree? And if so, do you feel the bill should be amended to include this?
Yes.
Okay. Another, I guess, building off of that, there was also another amendment or another suggestion by the CEO made that when anyone enters the database or the computer system, whether it is with intent or without intent, that the bill should capture either or, and then be able to enforce against those actors, whether they knowingly wanted to affect the outcome of the election or not. Just being in that space alone should be a violation. I have heard arguments on both sides about whether we can go that far and remove intent from the actor. I know that our act coincides with the criminal code as well. Can I get a little bit more direction on how the two acts, the criminal code and how this piece of legislation would act together, and whether it is possible to remove the intent portion?
So if you don't mind, I'm going to turn it over to Jean-François to answer this.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your question. So yes, there is an amendment that has been proposed to partially implement the Chief Electoral Officer's recommendation. This amendment would actually make it also an offense to attempt to do anything that is currently in Bill C-76, but always with the intent to affect the election. This new provision in Bill C-76 mirrors an existing provision of the criminal code. So in Bill C-76, the provision about malicious use of a computer includes two intent requirements. So one specific intent requirement related to the election, and one more general intent requirement that is only related to fraud. And in parallel to that, the criminal code provision will continue to apply. And of course, the criminal code provision doesn't have that specificity about federal elections. So yes, definitely, the Commissioner of Canada Elections will be able to investigate this offense in the Canada Elections Act. But if he finds that all essential elements of the offense are met, except for the one related to the electoral context, he can also turn to another investigative body and ask that charges be laid under the criminal code.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Oda. Now we'll go back to Ms. Kusi. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Minister, my apologies. I didn't complete my comment of thanking you for being here today. So thank you for being here today. Minister, normally during an election, there are severe limits on activities that the government can undertake at the same time that there are stringent limits on election activities. C-76 extends the time period during which political parties and third parties are subject to strict rules. So it stands to reason that there will be some reasonable limits on government activity during the same period. So given this, can you confirm with me? You have already announced a ban on most government advertising in the 90 days prior to the fixed election date. Can you commit to extending this ban to include the entire pre-writ period?
Yes.
Thank you. Will your government also ensure that major announcements, particularly spending announcements, cannot be made during the pre-writ period?
If it's outside of the government advertising policy, then government activity will continue as normal.
Thank you, Minister.
As with all activity of members of Parliament.
Thank you. Will your government ensure that government resources are not used to pay for campaign-style events, for example, town halls featuring the Prime Minister or other ministers, public consultations featuring elected politicians as opposed to public servants, or other public televised or stream events during the pre-writ period?
So as I said, any activity that would take place by the government normally would continue during that period, as the case with all members of Parliament in the House.
Will your government ensure that government departments cannot release public opinion research, reports, or other documents that may influence public opinion, except those, of course, required by law during the pre-writ period?
So as I've said already, normal government activity will continue until the writ period.
Not, I'll stop. Will your government ensure that no major announcements about policy intentions or budget projections can be made during the pre-writ period?
So normal government activity will continue during the pre-writ period.
That concludes my questions, Mr. President. Thank you very much.
Did any other Conservatives? There's a couple minutes left. 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to go back to the original question asked in the first round by Ms. Cusi regarding the segregated bank accounts. Now, you threw back, well, as a candidate, you open your own campaign bank account during the writ period, and that's true. We as politicians do open our bank accounts. But the fact is that our riding associations cannot receive foreign funding at all. So I'm going back to the recommendation made by Professor Turnbull, a former advisor to your very department, who recommended that there be a segregated bank account for a third party wherein all that information can be tracked, where those donations came from for the entire period leading up to a pre-writ and the writ period. Why is it that you don't support what I would think is a common sense approach by your former advisor to segregate those bank accounts to ensure that there is absolutely no chance, and verifiable no chance, that foreign funding is being used in those situations?
So again, C76 does require third parties who intend or have spent up to $500 on advertising to open a bank account, that they would have to disclose where all of the money came from and any money that's going into it. So I think that this is a reasonable provision to ensure the integrity of where and how they are using their money.
Again, I would only point out, though, by not having a separate segregated bank account for the entire duration where that money flows in, there's nothing preventing foreign funding from commingling in another bank account and being transferred to that bank account for the writ and pre-writ period.
In C76, they have to account for where the money comes from, and they also have to attest that there is no foreign funding in that bank account. If they do not do that, then they would be breaking the law if C76 passes. I think that is substantial.
Okay, and again, I would only point out as well, that can only happen post facto. It can only happen after the fact. I'll leave that at that. Going back to the question just asked by Ms. Cusi about ministerial and parliamentary travel. So in this bill, you're limiting what an opposition party can do during the pre-writ period, but at the same time, you're not limiting what a government can do. Now, I know you've said, normal government operation, but normal government activity often
You're conflating partisan activity with the work of members of parliament, and those are two separate things.
So campaign style.
Political parties will have a fair and level playing field with regards to the activities. It's only with regards to partisan advertising, and members of parliament, regardless of what political party they are in, will be able to carry out their normal activities and duties as required by them with their position.
Thank you. Now we'll go on to Ms. May. Welcome to the committee.
And thank you again. I want to thank Mr. Biddle, who gave me a slot. Very kind of you. And thank you, Minister. This is the first time, the last time you were here relates to one of my questions, was a discussion of what we would do about leaders' debates. But I just thought I'd take the opportunity to say that I'm supportive of the bill. The way I see it, it's a vast improvement on the current state of affairs. It really matters to get it passed before we go back to the polls in fall of 2019. But I do see, and I agree with my colleague, Mr. Cullen, there's a number of lost opportunities here. It didn't accomplish what it could have done in a number of areas. And so I guess my overarching question first is, how willing are you and is this government to accept any of the amendments that are being put forward with a goal to improving those areas where your government and you personally are on the record as wanting to see more?
Well, it's good to see you here as well. It's always nice to have you at committee or elsewhere. So as I have stated publicly before, that we are willing to entertain amendments. Of course, that it depends on what the amendment is and whether it's within the scope that we're willing to move forward on. However, there are a number of amendments that have been presented that I think can be accepted.
Okay. Well, may I ask you specifically, the privacy piece is one that has worried me. As a matter of fact, when the Conservatives' Bill C-23 was before this committee, in the 41st Parliament, I put forward an amendment to have the Privacy Act, political parties would not be exempt from the Privacy Act. My amendment in this case is more specific to the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act, PIPEDA, and this would be much more effective, I think everyone would agree, than each party coming up with its own privacy plan and tabling it. Can you give me a sense, I know this is very highly specific, whether there's any willingness to entertain this amendment, and if not, why not?
So I would like to see a broader study of privacy in political parties. I think that it's something that's really important. This legislation is, strongly based on the recommendations that the PROC put forward over the course of 2016 and 2017. And with regards to privacy, there was not unanimity with regards to what we should do moving forward. And I think that it does require a deeper dive. I think that political parties do play an essential role in terms of engaging Canadians in the political process. And I think that it would be worthwhile to understand how we could apply a privacy framework in a way that enables parties to continue to do that work and engage with Canadians, but also to ensure that we're doing more with regards to privacy.
Okay, thank you. Well, the first amendment I have up is actually the first amendment in the whole package, and I just wondered to get your reaction. There's currently, as you know, a quite public controversy in Quebec between one of Quebec's leading environmental groups, Équiterre, and the view taken by the Quebec election officials as to what is election advertising and what isn't. In my former life as Executive Director of the Sierra Club of Canada, there was a new information bulletin put forward by CRA in the 2006 election, which made some groups think, we can't even publish surveys. We can't say, this is where the Conservatives stand, this is where the Liberals stand, this is where the NDP stand, take your pick. So the elections advertising clarification that I'm putting forward would ensure that we distinguish between partisan activities and public information activities. And I'm wondering if you have any views of whether the amendment I've put forward might be acceptable to the government.
I think I would need to take a further look at it. However, one thing that I do think is important is that it should be noted that during the pre-writ period in C-76, it's only with regards to partisan-related activity. In the current Elections Act, and this has been the case for a long time, in the writ period, it's any advertising, so there is no distinction between partisan and issue advertising, and I think that that, in fact, is important to maintain because as the Supreme Court has illustrated in times past, particularly in Harper versus Canada, I guess, that the supremacy of the voice needs to be with political parties and political actors during the writ period. And so so I do think that that is an important distinction to maintain.
Okay. Your colleague has a point there.
If I may also add, Mrs. May, the third-party intervention regime in the province of Quebec is quite different. So at the federal level, anybody can be a third party, and there are spending limits. But in Quebec, I think that only individuals may intervene, and they can only spend a maximum of $200 or $300. So it's much more limitative at the federal level.
Well, thank you. Let me try to fit in one quick last question,
Really
which
quick.
is, we had been discussing a debates commissioner and leaders debates. That's not being brought forward. Do you anticipate the 2019 election will therefore be run by the consortium in the fashion that it had been since the 1960s, or are any further changes proposed?
There will be further changes. I do have an intent to ensure that in 2019 there will be a debates commission and commissioner for this, and I will look forward to discussing this with you shortly.
Thank you. Thank you both. Now we'll go back to Mr. Nader for the...
Will there be legislation brought forward for that commission?
No.
Why not?
It's October 2018, and based on the report from the Procedures and House Affairs Committee, I'll be drawing strongly on those recommendations. So
you're not going to introduce legislation this late in the game for a commission, but yet you're going to introduce legislation this late in the day game for a massive overhaul.
This legislation was actually introduced in the spring, and we're here today because of a filibuster. So
it was introduced on the date at which the chief electoral officer stated that he needed the legislation fully passed by after leaving Bill C-33 unmoved and unloved at second reading for that period of time. This study could have started much earlier. So. Now, I want to go back again to a comment that was made by our provincial chief electoral officer about the value of third-party advertising. He actually recommended potentially going with any spending should be considered third-party and needing to register. Do you agree with that?
So in the legislation, I think it's important to have a reasonable threshold. As my colleague, Mr. Murray, has noted that at the federal level, any individual or organization is considered to be a third party during an election. And I think that, $500 is a reasonable amount to have as a ceiling to be able to report. We have to remember that there are fairly onerous reporting requirements on third parties, and you'd want to have a certain dollar amount that could have a substantial impact on how Canadians are understanding the information that's coming at them. So I think that $500 is reasonable.
Now, his intention or contention was that it's much easier to see spending, period, than a funny $500 amount, which when you're looking at online digital sales, it's tough to see. I'll leave that there. A register of future voters, the provincial example was a minuscule amount of people on the register of future voters. How do you determine, how do you foresee there being more people on the federal register?
I think there will be. I think Canadians will be excited about it, and we are very excited about getting Canadians on the future electors list, and it's about encouraging more young people to participate, and so I'm hopeful that that will be one additional step in seeing a higher youth voter turnout. Additionally, C76 also returns the mandate of the CEO of Elections Canada to be able to inform and educate the public about voting. So I'm sure that should C76 pass, that we will see much more engagement by the CEO of Elections Canada for voters at all age levels and for everyone who is intending to participate in our elections, which I think will be very positive.
Now, would you support an explicit amendment from the Conservatives to explicitly ban the sharing of that information with political parties?
I mean, it would already be outside of the mandate of Elections Canada to share that information. So,
but would you support an amendment to explicitly
what's
state that?
What's important to recall is that Elections Canada only shares the register of electors, and the future electors do not end up on the electors list until they are 18. So that would not be necessary.
So I'm hearing that you won't explicitly state that in legislation?
It would be unnecessary to do so.
Thank you. Okay. Does anyone have one quick question without a long preamble? First come, first serve. Elizabeth.
And I went to the button. And double jeopardy question. Minister, when do you anticipate that we will see the rules for the leaders' debates?
Soon.
Okay, Colin, you can have your short question.
Thanks, Chair. Oh, no, not at all. It was the Chair's fault. The specific question is, can you point to a measure in here that will make good the claim of wanting to increase the diversity of voices, particularly women's voices in future parliaments?
So I think the amendment that I was discussing with regards to care expenses, I think that is actually very important because it will enable people who may have thought they couldn't run for office to put their names forward.
And my
as
specific
candidates.
question, is that for pre-writ period, or just during the 35 days typically of the election itself?
It's for the writ period because the pre-writ period would not be a reimbursable expense.
Right, so 35 days of being able to use fundraised money for childcare is the measure you're pointing to?
Could be 50, but I think that's really important because that's the time when you are spending full time on this and need access to those services.
The only reason I'll end here, Chair, the only reason I ask is that because we've talked in all the surveys of candidates coming forward, women talk about the nomination process as actually being much more difficult than the actual writ period itself in terms of family obligations. So the one measure you point to isn't the measure that women point to as the most significant barrier. I really encourage my colleagues to consider measures that have worked in other jurisdictions to elect more women. And that is generally connected back to the reimbursements we give back to parties. That's the amendment we're moving. If we want it, let's walk the talk.
Okay, thank you, Minister, for coming. It's
Thank you for having me.
Great way to start out our clause by clause today.
Yeah.
And we look forward in reporting back to you.
All right. Thank you for having me.
In Parliament. Okay, we'll suspend just so people can get their notes ready for clause by clause. A few minutes. Well, good afternoon, late afternoon, and welcome back to the 123rd meeting of the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs. This afternoon we'll begin clause-by-clause consideration of Bill C-76, an act to amend the Canada Elections Act and other acts and to make certain consequential amendments. I would like to again note the presence of the officials from the Privy Council Office, Manon Paquette, Senior Policy Advisor, and Jean-François Morin, Senior Policy Advisor. They will attend our meetings to provide assistance to the committee should members have questions about the bill. Thank you both for being here. Now, before we begin, I'd like to provide members with some general information about how we will proceed with clause-by-clause consideration of the bill. The committee will consider each of the clauses in the order in which they appear in the bill. Once I have called a clause, it is subject to debate and vote. If there are amendments to the clause in question, I'll recognize the member proposing the amendment who in around a minute or so will explain it. The amendment will then be opened for debate. When no further members wish to intervene, the amendment will be voted on. I'd like to remind members to ensure that clause-by-clause consideration proceeds in an efficient, orderly fashion. I may limit debate to the 5 minutes per party per clause. And as I said earlier, I'll be flexible as long as people, don't spend a lot of time on minor clauses where things are obvious, etc. The 5 minutes, if I do enforce the 5 minutes, it's per clause, it's not per amendment. So there's the odd clause that has 10 or 20 amendments, but there's still only 5 minutes. So yeah.
But I'm assuming that's when it says you may, so I assume there are many, you'll show greater generosity, particularly if it's obvious that we're not simply trying to use up time. Okay, thank you.
I will not, however, endeavour to use my discretion as chair to allow for as much. I will, however, use my discretion as chair to allow as much debate as may be deemed necessary, provided that members are judicious in their use of time. Amendments will be considered in the order which they appear in the package each member received from the clerk. If there are amendments that are consequential to each other, they will be voted on together. In addition to having properly drafted in a legal sense, amendments must also be procedurally admissible. The chair may be called upon to rule amendments inadmissible if they go beyond the principle of the bill or beyond the scope of the bill, both of which were adopted by the House when it agreed to the bill at second reading, or if they offend the financial prerogative of the Crown. If you wish to eliminate a clause of the bill altogether, the proper course of action is to vote against that clause when the time comes, not to move an amendment to delete it. If during the process the committee decides not to vote on a clause, that clause can be put aside by the committee so that we revisit it later in the process. Amendments have been given a number found on the top right corner to indicate which party submitted them. There is no need for a seconder to move an amendment. Once an amendment is moved, unanimous consent is required to withdraw it. And while I'm on the subject of amendments, I would just like to remind members that the committee has already agreed to amend Clause 262 by replacing line 32 on page 153 with the following. The election period is $1,400,000. If the committee has not completed clause, so that means we can't amend that clause anymore. If the committee has not completed clause-by-clause consideration of the bill by 1 p.m. Friday, then all remaining amendments submitted to the committee will be deemed moved, and the question put forthwith and successively without further debate on all remaining clauses and proposed amendments, as well as each and every question necessary to dispose of the committee stage of the bill. The committee's report to the House will contain only the text of any amendments that were adopted, as well as an indication of any clauses that were deleted. I thank the members for their attention. We'll now proceed to clause-by-clause consideration.
Just a technical question, Chair, before we start.
Where's mine? Do you have my note?
A question through you to our guests. First of all, thank you for being here and being willing to spend some, I don't know about willing, but you're going to spend some time with us. Just procedurally, because I've dealt with other legislation, we usually have also witnesses from the Minister's office as well as Privy Council handling all of this, or are there technical advisors from Minister Gould's office that will be made available to the committee as we go through some of these amendments? That's through you too.
The PCO is mostly Minister Gould's office. It's just sort of
the different. The PCO is Minister Gould's office? Is that the structure?
That's where most of this work is. It's sort of different than other bills.
No, we're from the Democratic Institutions Group at PCO, so we're public servants. So we will very likely inform you of technical questions related to the bill, but we cannot answer questions that relate to policy or...
Yeah, no, of course. So again, so you're from the, I missed what you said, you're from which department of the PCO?
We're from the Democratic Institutions Group within the Privy Council
Democratic
Office.
Institution Group within the PCO.
Yeah.
So then my question, again, through you, Chair, is there isn't somebody from Minister Gould's office, and you're answering technical questions. My assumption is then that the bill was also designed within the, forgive me, the Democratic Institutions Department of the PCO? I'm just trying to, because we're going to run through hundreds of amendments. I just want to know, as the committee, before the committee launches into this, who we need to ask. Is there anybody else to ask? And if the bill was designed within the PCO, then great, let's roll. If the bill was designed in the minister's office, then I suspect are concerned about bumps along the road when we're asking about things that you weren't involved in. So is my first assumption correct?
No, it was designed within our group. So
it was designed within your group. Okay, that's all I need to know, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. So pursuant to Standing Order 75, subsection 1, consideration of Clause 1, the short title is postponed, and the Chair calls Clause 2, and we have Green Party Amendment number 1. You want to speak to that?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I will very briefly put on the record.
Mr. Chair, pardon me, before we begin, I had a point of order, please.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
My apologies, Ms. May. Before we begin our extensive clause-by-clause consideration of Bill C-76, I want to give the courtesy of a heads-up to my colleagues about some additional Conservative amendments. There are approximately 21 amendments which were drafted by Legislative Council between June and September, but for one reason or another, and maybe several, did not make it into the package which was circulated on October 2nd. Mr. Chair, we intend to move each of these amendments from the floor at the appropriate point in our proceedings, but to ensure colleagues have the advantage of advance review, I am happy to circulate copies of the amendments now. Thank you. These amendments are in both official languages and are in the manner and form produced by the Law Clerk's Office. Before members get worried that we may be unleashing a number of new issues, I should point out that most of the amendments in this supplementary package actually complement the existing amendments which have been previously circulated. In fact, I believe there are fewer than a handful of amendments which are not connected or related to amendments which have already been circulated. To assist you, Mr. Chair, and our clerks with identifying where these amendments will be moved, considering line positions and so forth, I can advise that the first amendment for Clause 2 will be moved before Amendment PV1. The other amendment for Clause 2 will be moved after Amendment PV1. There is an amendment for Clause 37 to be moved after Amendment Liberal 2. There is an amendment for Clause 45. There is an amendment for Clause 70 to be moved after Amendment Liberal 5. There is an amendment for Clause 102. There is an amendment for Clause 122 to be moved after Amendment CPC 49. There is an amendment for a new Clause 155.1. There is an amendment for Clause 191 to be moved before Amendment CPC 69. The first amendment for Clause 223 will be moved after Amendment CPC 88. The other amendment for Clause 223 will be moved after Amendment CPC 92. There is an amendment for Clause 225 to be moved after Amendment CPC 101.1. The first amendment for Clause 234 will be moved after the amendment CPC 113. The other amendment for Clause 234 will be moved after Amendment CPC 114. There is an amendment for Clause 235. There are two amendments for a new Clause 252.1. There is an amendment for Clause 326. There is an amendment for Clause 357 to be moved after Amendment Liberal 60. There is an amendment for a new Clause 365.1. And finally, there is an amendment for Clause 377. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that will keep our Legislative Council busy.
Impressed as David. I'm impressed.
I tried to be more expressive than Bardish. That's a joke. Yeah.
Hey, you said you were going to move your First Amendment now?
Yes. So, pardon me. The First Amendment for Clause will be moved before Amendment PV1. Okay. Where do we?
What?
Do we have that? Okay. Oh, sorry. Oh. Okay. That's right. Pardon me. So, the First Amendment, entitled CPC 100008563, this one right here, do I just read it as the note? Oh, thank you very much. that Bill C-76 in Clause 2 be amended by adding after line 25 on page 2 the following. The ballot reconciliation reports prepared under section 283.1.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Is this related to Clause 2? This.
Yes.
Yeah. This clause is PB1 related to Clause 1.
No, it's related to Clause 2.
My apologies. I'll keep up next time.
Okay. Could you just briefly explain the intent of your amendment?
Sure. It relates to the inverted polling division polling station relationship and adds a ballot reconciliation requirement where multiple polls are at one polling station.
Discussion?
To the mover, can they repeat their argument for this particular one? I guess we're calling it, I don't know, we're going to call this CPC 1 or whatever we're calling this amendment? 108563?
Be -1.
-1?
Because we already have one.
1A? Just the argument for this, because of course referring back to the legislation is difficult to follow along with knowing what section 2831 within the bill is and what this amendment would do.
Ms. Kusi, there was just a request if you could explain the amendment again.
Back to the end of this, because I imagine you can't just find these things, chapters or.
So apparently the reason for this amendment is concern that there will not be the ability presently to identify the I guess numeric outcomes at one polling station, whereas the existing system ensures that there is the ability to determine the number coming from one specific polling station.
Mr. Cullen?
Yeah, it may be unfair to our witnesses, having just seen this amendment as we have, any ability to confirm or add to the explanation given to the effect of CPC -1 or whatever we're calling this, the ballot reconciliation reports? Are you familiar with this section of the Canada Elections Act and what C-76 changing it this way would do? As you're getting the amendments right now? As I said, Chair, in my preamble, this might be unfair to ask. But if you're familiar with this, but my inclination, and I think my colleague for the explanation. My inclination is to vote against something without the ability to base it on some evidence that I've seen at the committee so far, and I don't recall this being raised, unless our officials can tell us why this might be an improvement to our election laws in the next little bit.
Just give me a second to find the good reference.
I'll do the same.
So you're right that Bill C-76 makes many changes to the way that polling stations will be managed. So currently in the Act, we have a polling station, which is basically a ballot box and election officers that take the votes for one polling division. And when many polling stations are regrouped in the same place, we call that a polling place. What Bill C-76 changes is that polling places will become polling stations, and inside polling stations, there will be many tables where election officers will be able to receive the votes. So this follows a recommendation by the Chief Electoral Officer to modernize the administration at the polling stations, and I'm getting to you.
No, so just so I can understand the scenario you're talking about, and forgive me, committee members, but I exist in a visual world, that traditionally, particularly in urban centers, you'd come into a school or a church gym, there would be many polling stations from different districts, all contained within one. We would call that a polling place. C-76 changes that to call it not a polling place anymore, but consider that one entire polling station.
Exactly. So this will become a polling station.
Right. And so then that change under Section E1 to that new, it's not a new way of voting. It's just a new way of organizing the votes that come in, so that an elector can go to each. Doesn't matter which one they go to. Not each. That would be voting.
Eventually. So the Chief Electoral Officer will be given more flexibility in the management of polling stations. So the Chief Electoral Officer has already indicated that the voting at any table concept will not be applied for the 2019 election.
So the change that we're contemplating under this section that will allow a voter to just simply find a polling station, be remunerated, able to vote. He doesn't have time now, given the lateness of the bill, to make that change. But so this would be for future elections beyond 2019.
Absolutely.
Okay. And then can you comment on the change that this amendment would make to that scenario?
So this amendment would bring a change to the definition of election documents, so that the documents include so that the ballot reconciliation reports would be considered an election document. Now, the ballot reconciliation reports is a concept that will be introduced by a further amendment. But I may say already that the Section 533 of the Canada Elections Act, currently it's not in the bill, it's the Act, already requires the Chief Electoral Officer to make a report of the results by polling division.
Commonly referred to as bingo sheets? Is that the reconciliation report?
No, that's different. So the Chief Electoral Officer will still have to report results for each polling division in a separate manner. So not all polling divisions that will be included in a polling station will be amalgamated together. Okay. They will still need to be reported separately.
Okay, thank you.
So you're saying this isn't necessary? It's already done?
Well, I think that the other motion will allow us to learn more about the context. But I'm just saying that if the concern is about results not being given by polling division, the Act already requires that.
Mr. Nader?
Just as kind of clarification, it's almost, this clause is kind of a pre-coordinating amendment for CPC 72 amendment, which we debate later on. So it's just basically adding the definition of that to the election document, which we'll be discussing again in CPC 72 some degree later in our deliberations. So this is kind of because of where those election documents falls in the bill itself. It's the first we have to consider before we move on later to CPC 72.
Any further discussion? Ready for the vote on that amendment? All in favor of that amendment? Opposed? Amendment's defeated. Okay, PV 1.
Thank you,
Ms.
Mr.
May.
Chair. I was just, before we launched into the last amendment, I just wanted to put on the record that the process by which I find myself here is still offensive and difficult for me, where this committee's motion requires that I be in the committee to present amendments at clause by clause. This is a substantial interference with my ability to do my work, because we quite often have committee hearings and clause by clause at the same time. Two different committees meeting on clause by clause at the same time. It's a motion that I don't welcome, but I do welcome the opportunity to be among colleagues and present these amendments, which I will do as quickly as I can, given how many the committee has to deal with on Bill C-76. My first amendment falls under the subsection, just to remind people, where election advertising has a carve-out saying election advertising does not mean one of these things. So election advertising, for instance, in the bill as it's now drafted, doesn't include transmission of an editorial or an opinion in a newspaper. The concern I'm trying to address in this amendment comes from non-government organizations that are not actually in any way, shape, or form advocating or in any way partisan, but want to publish results, for instance, of surveys. In other words, information purposes, but not third parties. So to enter into a campaign as a third party suggests you're favoring someone. That could be very difficult, for instance, for a charity that must not take a position in an election, but which is, by its mandate, has an educational function. So to ensure that the educational function is not precluded, I have the amendment that adds that, again, one of the things that, for greater certainty, election advertising does not include general advocacy on an issue that does not actively promote or oppose a registered party or the election of a candidate. And then the rest are consistent with that to ensure that we also are not considering it as identifying or commenting on the position taken by an issue of a registered party or nomination contestant and so on. So I hope that's clear. We already have heard the minister's answer, so I'm relatively sure what's going to happen to my amendment. But I think it's really important that the voices of non-government organizations that are not advocates and are not partisan be allowed to be heard, because it's an extremely important source of information for voters. And registering as a third party is not only onerous, but may mislead people as to the intention of civil society organizations that are completely nonpartisan. Thank you.
Mr. Cullen?
Yeah, just a question through you to Ms. May. Thank you for the amendment. And I know it's not directly related, but we've seen recently new finance rules coming out with regards to the CRA and what charities can advocate for, period, and receive donations. That was introduced under the last regime. It was shot down in court, I think Ontario Superior Court, just a while ago. Government has suggested it's going to appeal. I'm wondering about the combination of that, the ability of charities to receive money to advocate. These are environment groups, anti-poverty groups, religious organizations, I would imagine, fall under this category as well, with their inability to advocate for the issues that they care about in elections. Like we all know as political actors that if a Canadian's going to donate to a political party to advocate their views, they get a very generous tax receipt back. If they donate to some of these charities, they get much, much less back, yet Canadians continue to use charities to advocate for issues. The challenge I pose to you is, does this survive a challenge at court? Because that's going to be some of the balance in this bill, Chair, is that some of the restrictions the government is against is some concern over whether it will be survivable at court, and the freedom of speech amendments that the court has to deal with. So does your amendment to this bill allow the voices of charities and those that support them to continue their advocacy? And you're saying surveys. How does that, if a charity comes forward and ranks parties and says, we're an anti-poverty or we're a religious charity and we like this party, this candidate, how does that not be perceived by the public and the media as just straight up partisan activity?
And I would agree with you, that would look like partisan activity, say we like what this party has said. Publishing the results so someone can read and say, oh, this party has this position. In other words, it's pure education. It's not saying we like what this party said because we surveyed them. It's saying, here is a survey. We circulated it. The parties in this election and individual candidates on a riding-by-riding basis. One must remember there are independent candidates to become members of Parliament, and in our Westminster parliamentary system, they have just as much a right to get public's attention as those that are in the larger parties. But the reality is, I think my amendment would actually make the legislation more robust in protecting free speech without increasing the risk of third-party actors using their position to engage through the back door in partisan activities, because they'd have to be very, very clear that it's general advocacy on an issue that does not promote or oppose. That means it's straight up public information, it's education. And I have to say, from my experience when I was Sierra Club of Canada, just not to take too long, but starting in 2006, CRA information bulletins, without any changes to the law, began to restrict very significantly the ability of NGOs to speak during election campaigns, even about the most basic fact-checking around an issue for which NGOs have expertise. When we invite NGOs to testify at committees because they have expertise, that expertise is very valuable to a voter and can often, I think, the rights of political parties to speak, voters can quite appropriately apply a discount factor to the truth of what they hear from political parties during election campaigns. But if they know that there's a group that they trust, whether it's Care Canada or Oxfam speaking to poverty issues, or a major organization that advocates for the rights of women like Equal Voice, their ability to publish a survey should not fall under the election advertising provisions of C-76.
Any further discussion? Prepared for the vote? All in favor? And all opposed? Okay. Sorry. Recorded vote?
Yeah, just on this one.
Recorded vote.
Thank you.
So on PV1, Mr. Biddle. No. Mr. Graham.
No.
Madame Lapointe.
No.
Ms. Sahota.
No.
Mr. Badaway.
No.
Ms. Kuzi.
No. No.
Mr. Nader.
No.
Mr. Reid.
I'm still thinking. No. I mean no. I've made up my mind. It's no.
Mr. Cullen.
I vote yay.
Okay, amendment's defeated. CPC 1, tabled by Mr. Richards. Could someone briefly explain the intent of CPC 1?
Okay, so in CPC 9950080, we are proposing that.
You have to move it first.
Oh, sorry.
New one or the one that you presented before?
This is a new one, because I believe now that PV1 has been defeated, the PV1A is moot.
Yeah, the one C0.2.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, so we'll call this CPC 0.2 for the administrators.
Okay.
Here. Yeah.
Choose the reference number.
It'll also be reference number if you want to follow 9950080, which is the one that was handed out.
Mr. Chair, just on point of order, do you want in each case the whole thing to be read out? I move and then just go through the whole thing, or first just to go right into the explanation?
No, I'd just like a quick explanation of what
So we
it
can
is,
skip the
especially
I
the new
move
ones.
that this be amended in such a line on such a page. That can all be skipped.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's the answer to your question.
So
Okay, well, I think it's obvious in here. Future elector means a Canadian citizen who is 16 years.
Okay. Discussion. Mr. Nader.
So just to clarify, this would amend the definition of future elector from 14 age to 18 to 16 years of age to 18. So it narrows the age group from 14, moves up to 16 for that requirement. I think just it provides a slight increasing the age. I'll leave it at that, Chair.
Okay, everyone understands that. Ready for any further comment? Ready for vote? All in favor?
Quick comment. How old do you have to be a member of the party, Conservative Party?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
do you mind if I do this one? 14, which I've always thought is way too low, and I've tried for years to raise the age to 16 instead of 14. My own experience with dealing with youth activists is there's a greater maturity difference between a 14-year-old and a 16-year-old than there is between a 16-year-old and, say, a 20-year-old. It's just one of those things that seems to me, based on plenty of party experience, to justify the age 16 instead of 14. There you are.
Anyways, right now it's consistent, and this is future elector, not
absolutely
elector.
It's absolutely consistent, but we would like to, speaking for myself, I would like to see both this be 16, and if I can get around to changing our party constitution, I would see that be 16 as well.
Okay, all in favor of this amendment? All in favor of the amendment? All opposed? Okay, defeated. Okay, now we're going to go on to what was originally CPC 1, which is for the reference number, which you already have, which is 998-5169, just for clarity. The reference number's in the top left hand.
Yeah, 99.
What?
That one actually has a number, CPC 1. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it has CPC 1 on it. And the reference is at the top left-hand corner. So you don't mix it up with the other CPC 1s.
What reference are we going to now?
We're back to that paper.
We're doing CPC 1, the one you got in your handout.
Okay.
And would someone like to explain briefly what this does?
Sure. Well, I think that it is in coordination with my question to the minister during her appearance here today, that the government at present would enjoy specific advantages in regards to them being the government. And what this does is this attempts to sort of level the playing field for the other registered parties in terms of restricting partisan advertising, I guess specifically, and other acts.
Okay. Discussion. Ready for vote? All in favor?
Well, maybe, pardon me, before we go to the vote, I mean, is this what she committed to within the discussion just now when I asked her, will you commit to not? In your opinion? So, no.
If this is attempting to have cabinet ministers, including the Prime Minister, of course, in the pre-election period, list all expenses, and then include that as partisan. Is it attempting to make those expenses part of the partisan advertising limits and/or ban?
Mr. Nader.
Chair, just to clarify, so we're still in clause 2, which includes the definitions and stuff like. So this is again basically a pre-coordinating amendment for later on, and this is, as Mr. Cullen noted, this is to align those periods. So this is a pre-coordinating amendment for that. So.
Okay, ready for the vote? All in favor? Mr. Reid. All opposed? Okay, amendment's defeated. Okay, PV2. And if this is adopted, CPC2 cannot be moved as they amend the same line.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just out of interest for those members who are wondering what PV is, it's Parti Vert. So, il sera un moment dans le futur à venir avec Max Bernier and an autre parti avec.
So we'll have another PPC, I guess, but this is the PV. So, Parti Vert.
The 41st Parliament, the government of the day was worried if we called the amendments G, that they like to hold on to G for government. But, that's my hope too. Anyway, never mind. In the pre-election period, what my amendment would do is to, at line 22 on page 5, extend the pre-writ period. I think it's very, very good that this legislation is going to apply rules to the pre-writ period on spending limits and conduct. I'd love to see the pre-writ period begin the day after an election. However, in this amendment, I've extended it only by 2 months so that it would start April 30th instead of June 30th.
Mr. Biddle, then Mr. Cullen.
Thank you so much, and I would like to agree with Ms. May and think that it should be extended. However, the legal evidence that we've heard is that there may be issues with respect to extending that period based on previous decisions, I believe, out of the British Columbia. Mr. Cullen is going to correct me on this, but
Even suggest
never suggest that I could be incorrect on this, and this was planned in order to make it a point in which Parliament was no longer sitting, and to start the election period and make it more compliant with court decisions.
Mr. Cullen?
A question to our witnesses. What is the pre-election period in Ontario for the last campaign? Okay, 6 months. It too was challenged in court as being too onerous. It survived that court challenge. I think, as I mentioned earlier, Chair, there's going to be some of the things that we're dealing with just with the bill as it is, where the tension between the civil liberties, the ability of freedom of speech, and those types of important values that we have in Canada go up against trying to set down limits. I think Ms. May's interjection here to extend out the intention of what the bill does to make it more meaningful, because we know much of that pre-writ period extends right through the summer on with fixed election dates, at least. Am I right in saying that? If we go back from the election, the writ period, and then go 2.5 months back to that, we're mostly dealing with summer in Canada, which I know is an impassioned political time for many of our voters. They're keenly tuning into CPAC as they are right now, but if what we're trying to do is level the playing field, then you certainly can't take that last 2.5 months and say, this is the most fevered time that we have to move the pre-election limits. We have to go, I think, further back, because while Ms. May might be right, the election seemed to start right after the last election. They certainly gain in the intensity in that May, June, July period, and certainly May, June before the House rises typically. So I'm supportive of the amendment, and I think it is pretty strong in court, just to Mr. Biddle's concern that we've already seen it tested once, and Ontario just went through it. The results may have been terrible, but it wasn't because of this change to the Ontario election rules that caused the results that we saw.
Can I just ask a question, Mr. Moran? Do you have other people here from the department? Are there other people in the room from your department?
Yes, absolutely.
So feel free to call on them anytime. Don't worry about that. Okay, are we ready for the vote? All in favor of PV2? All opposed? And it defeated. And now we're going on to CP2. We can have a quick explanation of what it does.
Just similar vein, only we make January 1st for the case of a third party and keep the other dates for all other cases.
Discussion?
This would actually go back to Chris's point about constitutionality, that we have seen this aspect challenged. Going, I believe, did you say January? January 1. The extension of that in terms of limitations on freedom of expression. I don't think this would make it 6 minutes in court. So I try not to vote for those things.
Okay. Ready for the vote? All in favor? All opposed? Defeated. Okay. We've spent a long time on Clause 2, but I'm going to allow a little more time on this next NDP 1, because this vote also applies to NDP 2, NDP 3, NDP 4, NDP 5, NDP 6, NDP 7, NDP 12, NDP 13, NDP 14, NDP 15. So the result of this vote applies to all those amendments. So, Mr. Cullen, do you want to introduce this amendment?
Yeah, absolutely, and all the consequential. So essentially, this is a question I put to the minister when she was here. We've had people testify on this. If the intention is we are all Democrats of various natures, we like people voting. We've seen a steady decline with the odd uptick in voter turnout. One of the things we've learned from past surveys by Elections Canada and the different provincial sections is that we don't have a 5-day work week anymore. We don't have regular hour work week anymore. People work all sorts of hours, and that this is essentially around Sunday voting. The ability to allow this would increase, by most international experts, a 6 to 7% gain in the turnout that we would have at elections. The countries that do this, just to give people some reassurance that it functions in functioning democracies: Austria, Belgium, Brazil, Chile, France, Germany, Greece, Italy, Japan, Mexico, Portugal, Romania, Sweden, Switzerland, Uruguay, and a whole bunch of others. Samara, who we all have referenced and used quite a bit, I don't know if they testify on 76?
Probably.
Yeah, I think
everyone did.
Everyone testified on this bill. Highly support this. The former chief electoral officer, Marc Mérin, who many of us know and is held in high regard just in terms of his running of elections, has said this: weekend voting would also increase the availability of qualified personnel to operate polling stations and of accessible buildings such as schools and municipal offices for use as polling stations. So it's not just on the voter side of things that people would, by all the evidence, and we're supposed to be an evidence-based committee, evidence-based government, I think they keep saying that, that the evidence for voters is helpful, but it's also helpful for Elections Canada in terms of their ability to staff this. We all know, when did we start doing early voting as a major effort? I want to say 2006 it started to really ramp up. 2004, 2006, more and more early voting dates have become available, and voters like it. They like to be able to vote at their convenience rather than the long lineups. Some still like the tradition of voting day as the official day. This simply gets rid of an old aberration when maybe political times were different, where the idea of having people work on a Sunday, staffing the voting stations, and having people participate in politics was seen as a negative. That is clearly not the reality in Canada anymore. We're a diverse country, and I think if we want to get more people out voting and we want to help Elections Canada run elections, this amendment and the consequential ones would be good to vote for.
Just to go on the record for people that are interested in this particular discussion, we did have a lengthy discussion at PROC, both sides of this, and so people can refer to that, people that are interested.
PROC has also done some work in this. There are some divided opinions on it. We were looking around for what the evidence was. How does this hurt the democratic process? Does it hurt Elections Canada's ability to run elections? And there's more. I don't want to be casual about it, but it was more feeling on people's opposition. I just don't like it, or it doesn't feel right, as opposed to here's the evidence of how it will make our democracies less effective. And again, with all those 42 other countries that are doing it right now, it just works. It's not even a thought. Many of them have moved it for quite some time.
Further discussion, Ruby, and then Elizabeth.
To that end point, I did want to say I agree. I think there should be evidence. There was a lengthy discussion here. Everyone was divided. There were, I think, throughout that time, we even had subs in this committee, and so there were people in all parties that were feeling differently about it, and that doing something of this magnitude maybe should be done through some consultation, and we should get the proper evidence to figure out how people would feel about it rather than it just being an amendment to this piece of legislation.
Okay, further discussion. Oh, Ms. May.
I just very briefly wanted to say that in the 41st Parliament, Bill C-23 for the first time broke the barrier against Sunday voting, and the previous Conservative government has put in the legislation advanced polling that would be mandatory on Sundays. Current state of the law, as far as I know it, what Nathan's amendment would do would be to provide a voting day quite close to Election Day, a little bit, but this would not be breaking a precedent or a taboo on Sunday voting. That was done by the previous government.
Yeah, I thank both colleagues for that comment. The one piece of, again, I know there are mixed feelings about it. I'm really trying to drive at why evidence supports this. One of the groups that spoke to us talked about underrepresented voters. These are folks that work shift work. These are folks that are single parents. And we were told that in overwhelming cases that one more opportunity rather than the Tuesday between this time and this time, it's easier on childcare. It's easier to not be doing shift work that day. And so for voters that are underrepresented in the voting tallies, low income, single mom, that type of voter, Sunday voting has been identified as something positive.
Can I just ask the witnesses, in the advance polls, are any of those on Sundays?
Yes, as Mrs. May has said, following Bill C-23 in the 41st Parliament, Sunday was introduced as a day of advance polling.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we ready for the vote? All in favor of NDP 1? Okay. All opposed to NDP 1? Okay, and all those consequential ones have been not passed. Okay, PV 3. This has some consequences too. This will also apply to PV 6, which if you're interested is on page 156. PV 9 on page 181. PV 12 on page 227. PV 13 on page 231. PV 15 on page 278. PV 16 on page 285, PV 17 on page 298, and PV 18, page 304, as they are all related by the concept of coordination. Also, if this is passed, CPC 150 on page 279 cannot be moved because it amends the same line as PV 15. CPC 152 cannot be moved as it amends the same line as PV 16. So could you introduce PV 3, Ms. May?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as you said, there are many consequential amendments. This goes to the issue of parties or entities in an election campaign coordinating their activities in a way that is offensive to the principles of democracy. In other words, appearing in sheep's clothing to deliver what's a much more partisan message, under the table coordination, and that sort of thing. What I can think at this point is that the better definitions that I'm providing, particularly in this First Amendment, Parti Vert 3, what I'm trying to present is what things are not coordination. This will make it much easier as a standard by which a future court is trying to judge whether there's been collusion, whether there's been a coordination that offends the Elections Act. So, for instance, well, I'll just read the kinds of things that do not constitute coordination. An endorsement of a party in such a form, if it's by an endorsement by a person, group, or corporation, their members, or shareholders, as the case may be, or inquiries that are being made in respect of legislation or policy-related matters. That doesn't give rise to the idea that was a coordinated effort. Joint attendance at a public event or an invitation to attend a public event. And I think this is very important because quite often you can see organizations inviting a candidate from one party plus a candidate from another party. That should be clear in the legislation that that is not coordination. That's not what the legislation is trying to get at. Or communication of information that is not material in carrying out partisan activities, advertising or election surveys. So it's again trying to provide more clarity and create a standard which will be far easier to prove down the road to avoid the offense.
Mr. Cullen and Ms. Hoda?
Yeah, through you to our witnesses. So one of the scenarios Ms. May just described is about a group inviting candidates, let's say, during the midst of an election. You have a women's group or an Indigenous group says, we'd like you to come and speak at this thing. Would that tripwire the collusion aspect of what's envisioned in C-76? Because that's something that happens every election that I've ever seen. And I have no problem with it. If an anti-poverty group wants to invite candidates to speak or debate or whatever, a women's group does that, that's more than normal. It's actually quite healthy. Ms. May, I think if I understood her intervention correctly, is trying in this amendment to clarify that that should be both legal and encouraged, but perhaps I've gotten something wrong in my understanding.
If I could just add to remind members of the committee, my amendments do come from testimony you heard from Professor Mike Powell at University of Ottawa Law School, who felt the collusion test would be difficult and that the coordination evidence would be easier to the word coordination is used, but what does it mean? What is the difference between collusion and coordination? So by specifying what kinds of examples would not trigger the act, we're clarifying things. I don't want to assert that without my amendments, one would automatically assume that that was collusion. But by having a carve-out in the definitional section, I think we'll avoid a lot of confusion later on.
Let me make my question more specific then. Could it be interpreted under this act that the scenario that I just described would potentially warrant a collusion, therefore have effect on that third party who organized a debate or a survey amongst candidates standing for election?
The series of amendments that are being proposed by Ms. May lowers the threshold for what is prohibited, so from collusion to coordination. The commissioner would have to make determination, but it's not meant to stop exchanges of ideas from organization. And if an organization was to actually do activities really to support a party, then that could be considered a non-monetary contribution to the party and would be covered under those provisions.
Okay, just a last question here, Chair, on this piece, but is the scenario I described, could a third party, because that's what we're predominantly talking about, right, in coordinating a survey of candidates, a debate of candidates, be under risk of being deemed in that collusion frame, which is a very strong term and a very strong idea that they're somehow being manipulative over the election rather than just making evidence available to voters?
Particularly, in a scenario like the one you described, I would say it would be unlikely, given that it's also working with multiple parties to organize such an event. It's not necessarily working with one specific party to get to a certain result.
Okay. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Sahota?
Yeah, I think it's a really bad idea when you take a term that's really specific, already defines coordination that is unethical in the word collusion, to then taking it to a more broader word where you have to possibly make a list of what that means and what it excludes. I think we're really muddying the waters and maybe casting a net that's far too large to solve a problem that maybe is not. I think the targeted approach is always best, and just from a legal standpoint, I think it's better when we have more concise language rather than getting into definitions.
Any further discussion? All in favor of PV3 and all the attendant ramifications? All opposed? Okay, that's defeated. Okay, CP3, someone can relate it to the Government of Canada again, if
Sure.
Ms. Kusi.
So first of all, I want to go back and apologize. I will say that in the CPC, or I should say, was it the CPC? Pardon me. Whatever. In the previous amendment that I was referring to, no, that was specifically in regards to ministerial travel. And in discussions with the minister, she did make it clear that that was something that would not be something of discussion. However, I do feel that in CPC 3, the inclusion of the Prime Minister or the Minister and these activities under the definition of partisan advertising is keeping in alignment with her commitment to our committee here today. So with that and with her commitment, I would ask for support for this amendment, please.
Discussion? Mr. Cullen?
I may have missed that. This is attempting to do what? This is attempting to affect the way that the government ministers specifically? Is it similar in the vein to the previous?
No, I don't think it's previous. I think that it is including specifically the actions of the Prime Minister and the ministers under the definition of partisan advertising. Further to the commitment made by the minister in the testimony today, or in her appearance today, to limit the presence of the government advertising in the pre-writ period, to align herself, excuse me, not herself, I should say, the government of the day, with the with the rules that essentially exist for third parties and registered parties with everyone else.
Mr. Graham?
Just a quick question. As I read this, as I understand it, if the revenue agency says don't forget to file your taxes because the election is during the tax season, that would be illegal and would count towards the party's expenses. I don't support that. Thanks.
I'm sorry, David, you'll have to ask that again. My apologies.
That's right. You were saying that anything that the government says during the pre-election period would count in the partisan advertising. So if we have an election in the spring for one reason or another, and it happens to be tax season, and CRA says don't forget to file your taxes, that is now considered partisan advertising. I think that's a very hard position to support.
Okay, it does say the message necessary for the health and safety of Canadians. I mean, does something like CRA affect the health and safety of Canadians? You know, I would say no. Well, yeah, that's true. That's right. I have seen people die of heart attacks from tax evasion.
Or go to jail.
Yeah, exactly.
That's health and safety.
So I don't know. I'm not. I don't know. Perhaps we need an amendment to the amendment indicating. Well, yeah, because I mean, I feel as though that this amendment provides for the fairness of putting the government on the level playing field of third parties and registered parties. But I do agree with Mr. de Graham that certainly there are some messages which are vital for Canadians to know. But perhaps that would be included within the health and safety of Canadians. I don't think it's fair to include to suggest other scenarios at this time outside of health and safety. I think the point of including health and safety is that if there was information that was pertinent for Canadians to know, the government would certainly have the right to provide that information of Canadians. But outside of that, partisan is partisan, and I think that is there's a very common sense standard which would apply either way.
And I think you're right. There's government and there's partisan, and I think they should remain separate. So I don't support this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you for the clarification, David.
Ready for the vote? All in favor of this amendment? Opposed? Yeah. You're on the opposed? Okay. It's defeated. Okay, CPC 4 is about a book being part of partisan advertising. If you wanted to talk to that, Stephanie.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious from the explanation that in the situation where the author or editor of a book is a member of the Senate or the House of Commons, that it is included within partisan advertising. Say, for example, if I were to release a book called Right Here, Right Now during the election period, you know, that perhaps this would be perceived as...
You're wrong now.
Well,
my book. That's the book
it's just a hypothetical title, Mr. Cullen.
Well, now you have to declare that as election spending. Do you see? This is a...
So, you know, clearly, you know, that we wouldn't want that for someone to have this type of publication advantage during this time. So.
Okay. Are we ready for the question? All in favor? Opposed? And defeated.
Please note I'll be releasing my book, Not Here, Not Now, during the period in the next election. Thank you.
Okay, shall Clause 2 carry? Okay, carried. Clause 3. Okay, this is, I'm going to get the, okay, first of all, on Liberal 1, we're at Liberal Amendment 1, and it applies to Liberal 18, which is on page 110, and Liberal 62, which is on page 351. And I will get the witnesses, because I think this is just a technical problem of wording in French in the order of it. Can you explain what this amendment is?
Absolutely, Mr. Chair. I will start with a bit of history, if you don't mind. So prior to year 2000, when the former Canada Elections Act was in force, it was very clear from the provisions included in that former Canada Elections Act that in order to vote, you needed to be a Canadian citizen and be 18 years of age or older. And then there were two other provisions related to these two requirements to be qualified as an elector. One clarification was saying that if you are 18 years of age or older on polling day, you could actually vote before polling day at advance polls, for example, provided that you were going to be 18 on polling day. And with regard to citizenship, then it was also very clear that if you were to become a Canadian citizen before the end of the revision of the list of electors, then your name could be included for future voting at advance polling. When the new Canada Elections Act came into force in 2000, this question became a bit unclear by reason of the wording of Section 3 of the Canada Elections Act in French. So the English version of Section 3 can be interpreted as to say that you need to be 18 years of age or older on polling day, but you need to be a Canadian citizen at all times. But on the other hand, the French version of the Canada Elections Act says that you need to be a Canadian citizen and 18 years old on polling day, which could lead to an interpretation, meaning that if someone were to become Canadian citizen before polling day, so for example, if someone knows that his or her citizenship ceremony is scheduled for 10 days before polling day, that person could vote before swearing the oath of citizenship. Now, when the new Canada Elections Act came into force in 2000, our consultations with Elections Canada informed us that Elections Canada always took a more traditional approach to interpreting Section 3. So Elections Canada never allowed someone who would become in the future a Canadian citizen to vote. It always required that persons be citizens before voting. But when this Bill C-76 was introduced, other amendments that are toward the end of the bill brought this little imprecision to light again, and therefore the proposed amendment would fix that, would make it clear that in order to vote you need to be a Canadian citizen when you exercise your right to vote.
And if we leave it the way it is, if they were going to become a Canadian citizen, but something happened to them and the ceremony was canceled and they didn't become one, and they could have voted already. So that's what it's clearing up.
Exactly.
Okay. Any discussion? Oh yeah, is someone moving it? David?
Yeah.
Did you want to say anything?
I think he said everything I need to say, so thank you.
Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Okay. Carried? Yes.
That has a consequential
I read
withdrawal.
that out. If you weren't listening, I read that out.
Pay attention, man.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, okay.
So that means Liberal 18 on page 110 and Liberal 62 on page 351 also carry.
Yes, but there's also some withdrawals as a consequence.
Some what?
Some withdrawals as a consequence. So Liberal 14, 17, and 42 no longer need to go forward.
Okay, so you're withdrawing Liberal
14, 17, and 42.
17 and 42. Okay, when we get to them, we'll bring that up again.
I'll try to remember.
Just want to make sure everyone's in agreement. Okay, clause 3. Clause 3 carried as amended. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Shall clause 4 carry? Shall clause 5 carry? Okay, under Clause 6, we have CPC 5. And this changes, so I think it changes something from 2 days to 7 days, but did you want to explain that, Ms.
Sure.
Kuzi?
So we are requesting longer notice for MPs seeking re-election to change the voting location.
Change the way? Say that again.
We are requiring longer notice for MPs seeking re-election to change the voting location.
Voting location of what?
Their own voting location?
Oh, where they vote.
Yeah, where they vote. For
So-
at least 7 days.
So right now, they only have to give 2 days' notice that they want to vote somewhere else. And the amendment suggesting they have to give 7 days' notice. Mr. Graham?
Where does this come from? There's been no evidence or suggestion that we needed to do this from Elections Canada or in reports or anywhere else.
Yeah, I mean, 2 days isn't that long. Like 7 does seem like a more, like is a longer period of time, obviously.
Do you want to vote?
Sure.
Okay. All in favor of this amendment? Opposed? It's defeated. Shall Clause 6 carry?
Maybe.
Sorry?
If there's consent, can we lump like 6 to 14, it seems?
Yeah, well, let's just do 6 now because we discussed something.
Okay.
Shall Clause 6 carry? Okay. You cannot be chair.
All in favor?
Okay.
I'll vote in favor of that.
Okay, so there's no amendments from clauses 7 to 14. Clauses 7-14 carry on division. Okay. Clause 15, CPC 6. We could get an introduction to. This one may be hard to read because they're referring to, it's in sort of 2 parts. So they're referring to the first one where it looks like there's nothing there. It's just because they're replacing, taking out 18 and replacing 18.1, but go ahead, Stephanie.
Very briefly, basically what this amendment proposes that would effectively have the effect of the chief electoral officer maintaining the existing public education mandate.
Taking the Fair Elections Act.
Okay. All in favor? Opposed? Defeated. Okay, CPC 7. So this is related to the no electronic voting without the House or the Senate. You want to introduce this?
I don't have anything further to add than what's there. John, do you?
Okay.
No, it's just that Parliament would be the final decision maker on whether we go to electronic voting or not.
Mr. Cullen?
I missed that. Who would be the prime? Is Parliament not the prime decision maker on this already? Could Elections Canada wake up tomorrow morning and say we're going to move to an electronic vote?
Conceivably, that could happen.
Yeah, I don't see it.
Okay, ready for a vote? All in favor? Sorry, can I get that count again? All in favor? Opposed? Okay, it's defeated. So clause 15 carry. Okay, there's no amendments in clause 16 to 19, so clauses 16 to 19 carry. On division, carried on division. Clause 20, CPC 8, and this is about a person, an officer not being able to live in the adjacent electoral district, whereas I think the act is proposing they could, and this amendment would not allow them to do that, if I'm right, if I've read it right. CPC 8, page 15 of your... So I think Elections Canada said often the officials are right very close, but this amendment wouldn't allow them unless they're in the adjacent. Yeah.
Not so much for jurisdictions like ours, Chair, but certainly in some of the urban jurisdictions, I can imagine that an elections officer is one street over, not technically in the district. Am I correct in saying that? That Elections Canada can have somebody hired as an elections officer. They live 2 blocks away, they're outside of the district, but I don't see the motivation for this amendment, unless I'm understanding it incorrectly, which is highly likely.
What can happen is riding boundaries can change. So someone was in the middle of it, now they're not.
Yeah.
So you have 2 skilled officers, both each was in their own riding. Thanks to a boundary change, they're both in different ridings, or they're both living in the same riding now, but
right.
One of them can't.
But imagine outside of any boundary change scenario, just a scenario in which you have an elections officer who lives not in Toronto Centre, but Toronto 1 up, and literally they're a block or 5 blocks. It doesn't really matter outside of the riding. Does that prohibit them from performing the duties of what we expect of them? I mean, I get it in large rural dispersed ridings. Why would you have somebody in, and there is some intimate knowledge that's required of the district to hold the election, but I just don't see that in a lot of urban and suburban contexts that it's going to matter to the voter and that they could handle most of the questions and problems that can come up.
Further discussion? All in favor of CPC 8? Opposed? It's defeated. Shall clause 20 carry? Okay, carried. There's no amendments from clauses 21 to 24, so clauses 21 to 24 carry on division. On division. Clause 25, CPC 9.
Sure. Our amendments in CPC 9 are it's to the maintain procedure to object early to persons incorrectly on list of electors. So obviously, if there are people who are incorrectly on the list of electors, we would want to ensure that as much time as possible was allowed in an effort to correct the list.
So just to clarify, currently as the bill is written, as of today, Elections Canada has rules in place where you can object to incorrect names on elections list a couple weeks in advance. The Liberal bill takes that provision out, so this is reversing that provision that has been asserted by the government in this bill.
So there's no ability to object to it now to someone on the list?
If this bill were to pass. Currently there is an ability to object in advance. If this bill passes, that will be gone. That's why this amendment is being put in place.
The witnesses have any comment on that?
I can confirm that this procedure is being removed from the Canada Elections Act, but my understanding is that procedure was less used because it dates back from the time where lists were kind of posted on telephone poles.
The only thing I would add is that the procedure is actually removed at clause, I believe it's 68. this is a reference to the PROC procedure.
Mr. Biddle?
Just very quickly that this provision seeks to remove a recommendation that was made by the Chief Electoral Officer, which is why this is in the bill, and we trust the CEO's judgment on this particular clause, so we're opposed.
Just to clarify, no, if this bill were to pass, the only place where you could object is at the polling location on election day. This change.
So the procedure would be, if you think someone shouldn't be able to vote, you complain at the polling place?
Correct. That would be the practical effect of this change.
Any further discussion? All in favor of this amendment? Opposed? Defeated. Okay, so clause 25 carried. There's no amendments on clauses 26 to 28. Shall clause 26 to 28 carry? Carried. Clause 29, CPC 10. I think this limits the number of election staff from one party, but I'll leave it to the Conservatives to propose it.
Yeah, it just indicates cap the proportion of a single party's nominees for election officers who are assigned to a given polling station. At 50%, thank you. Yeah. I mean, that seems to be, that strikes me as fair, that you wouldn't want a single party as election officers having the opportunity to be the majority of election officers. So
I'm just trying to think of scenarios in which this would be hard to achieve. Are there such scenarios where we'd be unable to run the actual polling station? Like I'm trying to think of, on the surface, it seems like an interesting idea, but again, all of these things are going to have many of these things are going to have practical impact on how the election is actually run. So could we not imagine a scenario where there's just not people available from other parties in which there ends up being more than 50% from one party as election officers?
Just while we're on this topic, is there other change? I thought there might have been other changes related to parties appointing people. Do you remember in the bill somewhere?
Oh, absolutely. As part of the polling station modernization portion of the bill, the bill gives more flexibility for the chief electoral, not for the CEO, for returning officers in electoral district to hire election officers in advance of receiving the party appointment suggestions. So the returning officers will now be able to appoint up to 50% of the election officer positions before receiving the party nominations. And this is consequential to a recommendation by the chief electoral officer because the party recommendations were coming at a late day during the election period, right, and often were not sufficient to fill all the positions. So,
Mr. Graham.
For one, I trust Elections Canada to administer our elections, but more to the point, in my election, the first couple of days of the campaign, my phones rang off the hooks with people that wanted to be named to Elections Canada to work there. I'd never heard of any of them before. I never heard from any of them again. And I suspect that these people called all the different parties, so they would show up on all the different lists. And so you'd have, if you have to say only 50% are named by each party, you might have people that are named by all three parties, and everyone's named by everybody, so nobody can be anywhere. And I see that being problematic in implementation. I don't see any need for this amendment.
Mr. Cullen, you're on the list.
Yeah, I find the sometimes crossover partisan nature of what happens in polling stations just odd. The first chief electoral officer I sat down with in my first election said, "Hi, I'm so-and-so, I'm a liberal." And I thought that, I didn't know that happened. I was new to politics and I didn't understand why that happened. So again, I'm trying to, sometimes we have to imagine the worst case scenarios, not the best case scenarios when we're designing these laws. Many laws are only designed for worst case scenarios. Is it not possible with this new provision that a returning officer could, who is of a more partisan nature and liked their partisan family, with this new 50% provision that's offered them, higher up of only one party, and then essentially have virtually all returning officers coming in at their discretion? I'm just asking for scenarios in which, you know, another campaign trying to deal with that election office is dealing with somebody of a quote-unquote opposing party. Is that possible with this provision that's coming later in the bill? I say this through you to our witnesses.
Mr. Collin, when were you elected?
What's that?
When were you first elected?
2004.
Okay, I think that at that point, returning officers were still appointed by the GIC, by the Governor in Council, but the Canada Elections Act has been amended a few years ago to provide that returning officers are now appointed by the Chief Electoral Officer following a fair and recruitment process. And
knows that information.
Well, despite the best efforts of some of those returning officers, and some voters, but I understand that.
And returning officers are now subject to a code of conduct that prevents them from acting in a partisan manner.
You think so, or they are? I don't know their code of conduct.
They are.
Oh, okay. I've not read their code of conduct. I'm a bad Democrat that way. So again, back to this amendment, what is being attempted is to limit that no group of returning officers can be more than 50% of one party's makeup. Correct. Have I got that right? Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Further discussion? All in favor of this amendment? Opposed? Defeated. Okay, shall clause 29 carry? There's no amendments in clause 30. Shall clause 30 carry? Clause 31, CPC 11. This is related to when you have merged parties, and you need to know the number of votes in the previous election to use the present proposal is the biggest of the merged parties, and the CPC proposal is the total of the merged parties. But I'd like to ask the witnesses, the reason you need these number of electors, it says the title of this section in the Act is appointments. What appointments is that talking about?
So, as we just mentioned a few minutes ago, political parties will still be able to recommend election officers to the attention of returning officers, and these are the ratio that is assigned to each party is determined with reference to the results at the last general election.
Okay, so the section we're discussing the amendment for says in the marginal notes, page 18, section 42, it says attribution of votes for appointments. I'm just curious what appointments is.
It is for the appointment of election officers. So, for example, at General Election 43, the parties will be able to recommend the name of potential election officers to returning officers in various electoral districts. So had two major parties merge following the previous general election, so following the 42nd general election, this section deals with how these votes from the 42nd general election would be counted towards the attribution of names that can be recommended by each registered party.
Okay. Do you want to introduce your amendment? You're suggesting both parties that are merged, that's the number of votes, whereas the present proposal is at the largest party of the merged ones.
And that this essentially just mirrors the party's allocation of broadcasting time. Like it's in coordination with that.
Discussion?
Sorry, can you remind me which CPC we're on now? 11. 11, thank you.
Okay, all in favor of this amendment? Opposed? Sorry, Mr. Collin,
I was opposing.
Opposing? Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, back to my other notes here. Shall clause 31 carry? Yes. There's no amendments in clauses 32 to 35, so clauses 32 to 35 carry. Clause 36, CPC 12. And this is about if you're suggesting that if you're younger than, right now you don't need to get parental consent to be on the pre-registered voters list. And I think the CPC amendment is suggesting that if you're younger than 16, you need to get parental consent.
Correct.
And I think we just recently got a paper, if I remember, that from Elections Canada, that they did a big research on this, and it had other countries and everything, and where this was.
Paper on this?
Yeah, I think I read it over the break week.
We got to get better break weeks planned for you, Chair. We're all looking shocked and incredulous that you got that report.
Okay, and I think I probably have it with me. So, any discussion on this amendment? If you're a young elector, you want to get on the list, being proposed that if you're under 16, you need parental consent. Right now, you don't need parental consent at all at any age for the list, which goes down to 14, I think, still, because the other amendment was defeated.
No, that's correct. Yes,
Yeah.
CPC 2 was defeated, so therefore it is not precluded. I think that we certainly live in an age of the internet and threats on the internet, and I think that parents have the not only obligation but also the right to know what their children are up to on the internet, and I think that something such as signing up for the voting registry is something significant, and I certainly would want to know if my children were doing that, and so I don't think that it is an unreasonable request or position to ask for this parental consent as a requirement for 14 and 15-year-olds to be on the voting registry.
Mr. Graham?
I think our objective here is to knock down barriers to youth participation. I think putting up new ones is not helpful to our purposes here, so I'll be opposing this. Thank you.
Ruby?
Say if only we were so blessed that our children were trying to sign up for an elector list, a pre-elector list online rather than doing other things, I think I'd be really happy and pleased and would need to know. But anyways, that's my opinion.
Anyone else? All in favor of this amendment? Opposed? It's defeated. Shall clause 36 carry? Okay, carried. Clause 37, and just to note that if we pass this amendment, Liberal 2 cannot be moved because they amend the same line. So we're at CPC 13, and this is about having to report people not only who's on the list, but being removed from the list. So Stephanie, you want to?
Sorry, 13. I'm looking at page 20, 36. 995. This is the amendment, the amendment that I suggested in my list of amendments. That's what this is referring to, the 9950142.
2756.
List of deceased. This is
book.
Okay.
One of the original ones.
Sorry.
And it's relating to when the people have to provide lists.
76, I'm seeing.
Yeah, your other one will be right after this one.
Thanks a lot, I appreciate that.
Because it comes after line 20. Oh, sorry, after Liberal 2. Mr. Cullen.
I believe, and every campaign runs into this, I think sometimes the electoral lists are not quote unquote cleaned, and we end up trying to contact dead people, to not put too a rough point on it. And it's, if I understand this, and maybe our officials can help us understand it otherwise, that it can be quite traumatic, as I don't know if any of you have gone through it, but when you try to contact somebody and then you remind them that their husband, wife, family member is passed, it's not a great call to make, and it's kind of frustrating. So if this ups the bar for the electoral list and allows Elections Canada to provide a cleaner list to us, and I think that would be nothing but good.
Mr. Graham, then Mr. Nader. Oh.
Okay, I don't know. But if I could maybe propose a sub-amendment in the hopes of maybe reconciling with Mr. Graham's amendment that's forthcoming. And I've got this in writing, I'm going to hand it over. That amendment CPC 13 be amended by adding, after the words TORs, the following, quote, in electronic form or in formats that include electronic form. And I'll bring these over.
Okay, so basically the sub-amendment puts what's going to be in Liberal 2 in, but it keeps the fact that they must report on who's removed from the list. And we have Mr. Graham now.
Yeah, no, if there's technology from the 1970s, maybe in the 60s, called a DIFF, D-I-F-F, where you get a list and you compare it to the old list and you can see what the differences are. When Elections Canada sends an updated list, dead people are already supposed to be removed, and if they're not, then sending this list isn't going to change that fact. So I don't see the purpose of the amendment in the first place. And I don't see what the purpose of sending a list only of deceased people is. I don't see any advantage to this. So I appreciate what you're trying to do, John, but I can't support your amendment in the first place.
Elections Canada have any
PCO?
Sorry, PCO on the suggestion that the need to report people that were deleted from the list, as well as giving the updated list?
Well, as it was just said, this amendment would require Elections Canada to send a list of deceased people who were specifically removed from the list. I cannot comment on the need, but yes, these persons are not on the list of electors that is provided by Elections Canada anymore. So.
Okay, I'd like to welcome Luke Theriault from the BQ. Thank you for coming. Merci. Okay, on the sub-amendment, so people understand the sub-amendment, just adding the electronic aspect that would be otherwise added in Liberal 2, about keeping the nature of this amendment, CP 13, to also provide a list of who's been deleted. All in favor of CPC 13? First, the sub-amendment first. All in favor of the sub-amendment first? Opposed to the sub-amendment? Okay, all in favor of the amendment, CPC 13? Opposed? It's defeated. So going on to Liberal 2, suggesting Elections Canada also has to produce the list electronically. Does someone want to introduce this? Mr. Graham?
Sure. C70, Bill Lib 2 is to ensure continuity in the provision of registered parties of lists in electronic formats. Proposed amendments would clarify that such documents must remain available in electronic format in addition to any other format the Elections Canada could see fit. The similar provision would apply to the distribution of maps. I think it's a pretty straightforward change.
Before you think about this, it also applies to Liberal 3 on page 37, Liberal 4 on page 38, Liberal 6 on page 40, and Liberal 7 on page 41. Further discussion? All in favor of Elections Canada having to produce a votes lists electronically as well? Seems to be of the age. Passed. Okay, shall clause 37 carried as amended? Yes. Okay, there's no amendments in clauses 38 to 46.
On 37, we had the 9950142. That was the one that we...
Oh, yeah, sorry. We do have another. We do have another amendment. Do you want to introduce your... It's one of the new ones?
Yeah, so it adds, for the register of future elections, the express prohibition on sharing register data with parties, candidates, and MPs.
Sorry, did everyone understand that?
So that the information retained within the register of future electors adds it so that it is absolutely prohibited to share the information of obtained and retained within the registry with parties, candidates, and MPs. I mean, certainly if we are going to put our children on the list and then put them on the list without the parental consent, then at the very least what we can do is ensure that their data is not shared beyond the list. Again, I think that's a minimum obligation that we can do for our young people.
Do our witnesses have comment on that?
Well, I would only comment that section 45 already provide the information that the chief electoral officer is allowed to provide to the parties. And in administrative law, if a government body is not given with a specific power, it basically cannot do what is not specifically allowed. So,
Mr. Biddle.
Well, I just clarify it's moot.
Well, it would certainly add clarity, but I think it's already quite clear that the chief electoral officer cannot provide that data through registered parties.
Define how it would provide clarity, please.
I'm sorry?
Can you further define how it would provide, how it is not clear in the existing legislation?
Provide how it is not clear?
Okay.
Sorry,
You're
could you
saying
repeat that?
it would provide clarity if we were to insert this amendment.
I'm just saying that it would provide a very special situation where a power is denied from the chief electoral officer. That would be very uncommon in the Act. So yes, it would say that he or she cannot provide that information, but I think the Act is already quite clear that he cannot provide it. So.
Okay. Those in a recorded vote has been called.
Mr. Biddle?
No.
Monsieur Graham?
No.
Madame Lapointe?
No.
Ms. Sahota?
No.
Mr. Badaway?
No.
Ms. Kuzi? Mr. Nader?
Yes.
Mr. Reid?
Yes.
Mr. Cullen?
Yes.
Okay. It's defeated. Just for the record, though, for the minutes, so we know which, because this is an added amendment, it's reference number 995-2296. Amendment. That's one. Give the wrong number. Scratch that from the minutes. The one we just voted on is reference number 995-0142. Okay, so from clauses 38 to 44, there's no amendments. Shall that carry? Carry. Now there's a new amendment for clause 45. if you want to introduce the new amendment, Stephanie.
Sure. In this similar vein of the last amendment, this prohibits the chief electoral officer from sharing data with provinces and territories where they are obliged to share with parties, etc.
Is it 0142? Which?
995-2296.
Oh, 2296. Okay. I'm with you.
So this is just talking about future electors again?
Yes, correct. Pardon me.
And I assume that elections PCO is the same response, that it's not necessary, it's already covered, in your opinion? That they're not allowed to share that?
No, actually, I don't think it's already covered. The act is currently pretty broad into the agreements with the provincial chief electoral officers that Elections Canada can enter into. So such an amendment would make it clearer that the standards that apply at the federal level should also apply when shared at the provincial level.
So are you saying without this amendment, Elections Canada could give the list of young voters to the provinces?
Yes, so there is a provision in the bill that allows Elections Canada to enter into agreements with provincial bodies who manage a list of electors. So yes, if this amendment is not passed, then the information that is found on the register of future electors could be shared. Of course, the chief electoral officer has no obligation to enter into such an agreement. But yes, in theory, that could be the case.
Mr. Cullen.
So that's enough for me to know. I mean, we are collecting this information for a very specific reason. It should only be that reason. We just had affirmation that none of that information could go to political parties. It only makes sense that we would also imagine that information doesn't go to provincial electoral officers, who may then also have different rules about how they share information with political. Let's just not open it up the possibility that something that will be information that's offered in good faith, young people trying to get on the registry list, stays exactly where it's intended and goes no further.
Any comments from the government? Okay, any further comments? Recorded vote.
Mr. Biddle.
Yes.
Monsieur Graham.
Oui.
Madame Lapointe.
Oui.
Ms. Sahota.
Yes.
Mr. Badaway.
Oui.
Ms. Kuzi.
Yes.
Mr. Nader.
Yes.
Mr. Reed. Yes. Mr. Cullen.
Well, in the sense of collegiality, yes, of course. Look what's happening.
Okay, so that was unanimous. So the amendment with the reference number, Philippe, make sure I get this right, 995-2296, passed unanimously. So clause 45 pass as just amended. Okay. And clause 46, I believe there's no amendments. Clause 40, there's a new clause, 46.1. So clause 46, Carrie? Okay, now there's a new clause which has already been defeated. NDP 2 because of NDP 1. NDP 3 was also a casualty of NDP 1. But we'll have CPC 14 introduced now. This is about protecting the list of electors.
Yeah. So I guess, well, I guess it's interesting to me because it would seem that then 995-2296 would be included with this amendment if it was passed. it does also seem eerily similar to CPC 9950142, although I guess 9950142 expresses the specific prohibition, not the prohibition to the specific entities of parties, candidates, and MPs, where this is on sharing information outside of Elections Canada. Maybe our witnesses could say if there are ever situations now where the information is shared, this data would be shared outside of Elections Canada if they could see it in any circumstances, like if Health Canada would ever request this information, or I can't imagine scenarios. Would there be a necessity to share this information outside of Elections Canada, please?
I do not think so, and I would refer you to the bill, page 26. Line 11 in English. So I think that the new paragraph 66E.1 would provide for what you're trying to achieve here. So,
okay.
So that section says that...
yeah, what does it say, please?
Sorry. So
I'm sorry to ask.
No.
Yeah, thank you.
It says that no one can knowingly use personal information that is obtained from the register of future electors, except as follows: for the purpose of updating the register of electors, for the purpose of transmission of information in the course of public education and information programs implemented by Elections Canada under subsection 18 sub 1, for the purpose of the administration and enforcement of this Act and of the Referendum Act, or in accordance with the conditions included in an agreement made with a provincial entity, so made under Section 55, in the case of information that is transmitted in accordance with the agreement. So the Act is already quite clear on what...
Did we ever have an example where something was used outside of Elections Canada? Okay, we'll go to a vote, please.
Okay. Recorded vote. Elections Canada was saying this was already covered in the clause just read, but you want to call the roll? Sure. We're on CPC 14.
Mr. Biddle?
No.
Monsieur Graham?
No.
Madame Lapointe?
No.
Ms. Sahota?
No.
Mr. Badaway?
No.
Ms. Kuzi?
Yes.
Mr. Nader?
Yes.
Mr. Reid?
Nope.
Mr. Cullen?
No.
Okay. That's defeated. So clause 46.1 has disappeared now, right? So clause 46.1 disappeared because of the various decisions already made. So now on to clause 47, and we'll look to CPC 15. This is related to the timing of when the election's called.
So, Chair, just to clarify, this is just in cases where the election writ is issued at a certain period of time close to the Christmas season. It provides the added writ period for that period of time, so we're not having polling days necessarily on Christmas Day. And so it's between November 12th and November 30th, and then it's extended to 57-day writ period, up to a 57-day writ period.
Thank you, John.
Just a quick commentary. The 2005-6 election would be an example where that could have been a significant issue.
How so? Yeah, pardon me.
Go ahead.
Oh, John, because it would have fallen on Christmas, the voting day?
So, of course, I wasn't there. Mr. Cullen was here in 2005. The Paul Martin government was defeated in late November. So if he did the 35 writ period, would be advanced polling on Christmas Day.
Oh, okay.
So at that point in time, the Prime Minister of the day called the election for January 23rd of 2006. It was a longer writ period, falling over the Christmas season. And I can't remember off the top of my head the result of that election, but I think it was a good one.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Of course, was in a minority parliament. Because the whole preview to that was the Stronach crossing. I guess what I'm saying is the circumstances were somewhat exceptional. The outcome less so. But I understand the intention of it is not to have government locked into an election cycle. If there wasn't another unusual circumstance which led to an election call and then the not being able to extend beyond the holiday season, voters would be pretty ticked off. They were ticked off anyways. It was a 60-day campaign. It was horrible.
So the present act limits to 50 days. So if it was November 30th, that would take it to about January 20th-ish. And this would make it to January 27th. Why do you end at November 30th? Wouldn't it be more problematic if it was in December?
Sorry, repeat that, Chair?
Why are you saying, it doesn't look like November 30th is a problem, but what if the writ was issued during December?
But then
that wouldn't be a problem either because it'd be too far.
Farther past Christmas.
Right.
It's in a situation where you'd have potentially polling days on Boxing Day, Christmas Day, New Year's Day type thing.
Mr. Graham?
I already see 2 weeks of flexibility in this because it's not like you have to go 50 days. That's the upper limit. It's not the lower limit. I don't see what we're getting out of this at all. What's that?
You're saying if they just called it on the short end of the stick, it would be early December, mid-December?
Yeah, you got your time. And if you have to go longer, you got 2 extra weeks. You can go past Christmas and New Year's. So I don't see the advantage for that once in 3 generation situation.
Mr. Nader?
Chair, and I mean, there's other dates as well, nomination deadline date, dates that have to be complied with. If you're doing it over the Christmas season, there's going to be days that are going to be problematic for Elections Canada to find staff, to have staff open. I recall, in 05, 06, Elections Canada's offices were open on Christmas Day, and that's problematic when you're finding people to staff those offices at that point in time. So, I mean, it's a range. It's an extra 7 days, and I think provides some flexibility when those situations happen in minority parliaments, and there could very well be minority parliaments in the future.
Any further discussion? Ready for the vote on CPC 15? All in favor? Opposed? It's defeated. Okay, CPC 16 is relating also to adding 7 days to the election period. Stephanie?
So, Chair, this is just extending it to a 57-day writ period, up to a 57-day writ period, again, giving some flexibility for timing at different points in time. It's an extra week of the maximum, and it provides for the ability for...
But not related to Christmas.
Not necessarily, but potentially related to Christmas season, or potentially related to other significant...
This is a broader extension of
exactly. So significant dates in the calendar that could be proven problematic depending on the timing, holidays, significant religious observances. So it provides some flexibility to those dates and time.
Okay.
Because it really can't go that long anyway.
Well, we'll vote anyways.
All right.
All in favor? Opposed? Defeated. CPC. Okay. There was NDP 4, but that was lost with NDP 1.
Another good one.
So shall clause 47... Sorry?
Recorded vote on this?
Recorded vote on clause 47.
No, clause 47.
Mr. Biddle.
Yes.
Monsieur Graham.
Yes.
Madame Lapointe.
Oui.
Ms. Sahota.
Yes.
Mr. Badaway.
Oui.
Ms. Kuzi.
47 not the amendment. Okay.
No.
Mr. Nader.
No.
Mr. Reid.
What is with you guys?
Mr. Cullen.
Yes.
Okay, clause 47 carries. Clause 48. Okay, we're going on to CPC 17, which I can't find. But if CPC 17 is adopted, CPC 18 and CPC 19 cannot be moved as they amend the same line. So could we have an introduction of CP 17?
Well, I believe it's just essentially opposing the 50-day maximum writ period, which I would expect the government would be in support of, considering how well it worked for them in the last election. Why, in fact, I remember being at Mercedes Stevenson's wedding when the election was called and thinking, federal election, day one. It was a sad day. It was a day in August. It was,
Mr. Nader, oh,
so
sorry.
yeah, just to say, you should support this. This is actually something that has historically worked in the government's favor.
And just to clarify as well, this specific clause, Clause 48, applies to those elections which have been rescheduled based on a candidate's death or a natural disaster. So that's the differentiation in these ones.
Does that make a stronger argument?
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay. Mr. Graham?
Our witnesses, if we start passing some of these amendments and make it 57 days and refusing other ones, what happens? I rest my case.
Relevance. Okay. All in favor of CPC 17? Opposed?
Campaign forever.
Okay, it's defeated, as is, oh no, we can go on to CP 18 now, because that was defeated. So CP 18, Stephanie, you're on again.
What? Yeah, it's just, I'm gonna get used to this for tomorrow, let me tell you. So again, well, it's, I'm having a hard time seeing what the difference is between this and the CPC 15, because it says 50-day maximum writ period, allowing a maximum writ when writ issued between November 11th and 30th. I feel we defeated this already.
Yeah, so again, this clause is only for those elections which have been rescheduled based on a death or a natural disaster.
So it's the same Christmas period, but on rescheduled elections. Okay, all in favor of this amendment? Opposed? Defeated. Okay, CPC 19.
So again, I see this as similar to 16, increasing it to the 57-day maximum for other arrangements like Groundhog Day, I guess.
Big appetite for these extensions. So can we have a vote?
My clause here.
Maybe that's why it came to mind so easily, David. I mean, Mr. DeBerggraff.
Okay, all in favor of CPC 19? Opposed? Defeated. NDP 5 is lost because it's consequential to NDP 1.
It just feels one by after another for them.
So, Clause 48 carried.
I understand.
On division?
Mr. Chair.
48 is carried on division. There's no amendments in Clause 49 to 51 unless we have a new one there. No, okay. So clauses 49 to 51 carry. Okay, Clause 52, we have amendment. CPC 20. Ms. Kuthi.
Okay. Okay, so this prohibits responsible officers of third parties which fail to file expense reports to be candidates, mirroring the current rules for candidates and official agents. That makes sense to me, that if an officer of a third party failed to file an expense report, then that they would have essentially broken the rule and requirement in an effort to be a candidate or official agent. So it makes sense to me, I guess, also with the government's efforts to provide transparency and accountability for third parties.
Could we, the PCO, give us a comment on that?
Absolutely. So Section 65 of the Canada Elections Act currently provide ineligibility criteria for candidates. So paragraph 65I says that that a person who was a candidate or an official agent and basically who failed to provide his or her returns is then ineligible for to be a candidate again at a future election. But paragraph I only applies to former candidates. It doesn't apply to, for example, the official agent of any other registered entity under the Act.
So you're saying part of this is already covered?
No.
Part is not covered.
No, I'm just saying that the amendment would create a situation where, for example, the financial agent of a party who did not file on behalf of the party would be able to run as a candidate, but the financial agent of a third party, which is more remote from the election process, would be ineligible to file as candidate.
Which doesn't kind of make any sense, does it? That doesn't make any sense, right? It's an inequity.
It's a policy choice, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Mr. Nader. Oh, sorry, and then Mr. Biddle. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, Chair, I think it's a fairness issue. If if I as a candidate fail to file reports, I can't run as a candidate. I think it'd be the same for a third party responsible person. If he or she fails to file reports, he or she should also be suffer similar consequences and be unable to run as a candidate as well.
But I think the Elections Canada person was saying that the official agents of parties 1 and 2 are not prohibited. So this would just prohibit the party 3, put the third party at a disadvantage and not the first 2 parties. Mr. Biddle.
Yeah, I don't think we should be engaging in taking away someone's ability to run for elected office lightly. I don't think we really heard any evidence on this, and I don't think this is something that we should proceed with at this point.
Okay, ready for the vote? All in favor? Opposed? Okay, it's defeated. Shall Clause 52 carry? Shall Clause 53 carry? No amendments. Okay, Clause 54, we have CPC 21. Stephanie.
Yeah, so this is essentially that voter information cards are not an acceptable form of ID. We've just seen in the media this week examples of refugee claimants who received voter eligibility cards in the mail. If they were to not say anything, complete them, send them in, they would receive voter information cards and be on the electorate list. And we feel strongly that that they should not be used as a form of an acceptable form of identification in voting. And I think that this example that we just saw within the media provides great evidence of that. That we don't know how many of the voter registration cards were issued at this time to persons who were not entitled to them. And this is just one case and one example. And so it leaves us, as the opposition, to call into question the validity of the voter information cards as acceptable forms of identification.
If I were a betting man, I would say the jury's not still out on this, but I'll go to Mr. Graham and then Mr. Biddle.
I cannot think of a part of the Fair Elections Act that was more offensive than the restriction of the VIC as a voting identity.
Mr. Biddle?
So I will... Okay, if you want...
Offensive
than what you want to put back in this thing.
What would you say then to the example that just happened?
And again, at the end of the day, we're hearing it, and it's coming out, and it's shocking to hear it say it's refugees. The refugees could vote, and we're afraid of this other, and we're carrying on this dog whistle politics that seems to put itself into Conservative Party policy and previously Conservative Party governments. We've heard from witness after witness that there is no case of voter fraud. And who does this help? This helps my grandmother, who gets the card, puts a magnet on her fridge, goes with the voter card, goes with her help card, and goes to vote at the election day. And under your provision, she wouldn't be permitted because we're afraid of this possibility. This Republican Party idea that there's voter fraud out there, that there's potential that refugees may be able to vote. And there's no evidentiary basis apart from stirring up fear in the Canadian population. We've heard from witness after witness. We've heard from Elections Canada. I can't support this.
Stephanie?
Well, I think what Canadians are most afraid of is the legitimacy of the electorate. A Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian, but we must ensure that it is Canadians who have obtained this right to vote. And this example, which was in the media this last week, specifically identifies a case where individuals who did not have the right to vote could potentially end up with these cards and be counted in the electorate when they are not a legitimate part of the electorate. And I believe that Canadians are just as concerned, if not more concerned, about maintaining the legitimacy of the electorate.
Monsieur Thériault.
Voters list ID.
Okay. Monsieur Thériault.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, de me donner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to support the amendment by my PC colleague and call my colleague to be prudent because his argument seems to be translating what he's denouncing.
If we take the example of Quebec, in Quebec, there is an obligation to present an identification card, a photo card with the bearer's picture. We've heard the same arguments in 78 following the election that led to a phenomenon of identity theft. You know, the $20 votes, we were calling them. And the parliamentary tradition in Quebec is we changed the Electoral Act by way of consensus. And we had to go to court. Bernard Danucci, if you wished, the Berducci decision gave the argument to the complainant, where we had not previously needed to provide a photo ID card. Now, I've seen that there are many different documents possible that can be used, that can serve, presenting it to the scrutineer to prove identity. Now, if it's restrictive in Quebec, that is a photo card, a photo identification card, I could understand why we might be tearing out our hair and flagellating ourselves and saying, oh, people are not allowed to vote. We're suppressing their vote. Well, people will show up with an ID card, and they do not feel in any way mistreated, abused, oppressed. The legitimacy of the electoral process is absolutely fundamental. You know, you can take a VIC card and you can easily duplicate it. If in Quebec we were able, doing a general election in Quebec, have a system that could allow for identity theft, and the individuals say, no, I didn't vote, I voted twice. People were going to the same polling station, and they had the chutzpah to say that no, they didn't vote yet. The integrity of the electoral process is much more important. There are ample variety of pieces of information that you can use. The VIC card is a reminder to the elector so that people can get organized and prepare to go vote. But to make of it a formal identification document, you're just pandering to people who may be bad intent, who know the process, who game the system, and they'll photocopy them or duplicate them, and they'll use them inappropriately. So I would advise great prudence. We're not here to caricaturize each other here.
Je pourrais seulement mentionner que, effectivement.
Well, I might mention that in the electoral law in Quebec, there is an obligation to present an identification card with photograph. There are 5 various possibilities, but there's some major differences between the provincial and federal level. You only have to prove your identification in Quebec, but in a federal election, you have to prove not only your identification, your identity, but also your resident address.
In the federal election.
No, of course, and if so, Bill C-76 would lift the prohibition on identifying the voter information card as one of the potential pieces of identification that can be used. But if these amendments are passed, someone presenting himself or herself with a voter information card at the poll will always have to show at least a second piece of identification to prove his or her identity.
Thank you. Mr. Graham.
Il n'existe aucune forme d'identité gratuite.
There is absolutely no federal identification card that gives you an address. So I read something on Twitter this week.
Registration and ID. We'd like to clear the record. This is from Elections Canada directly. Elections Canada mails voter registration letters to potential electors. These letters say the recipient is not registered to vote. They invite the recipient to register if they are a Canadian citizen and at least 18 years of age. Voter registration letters for potential electors are not the same thing as voter information cards. Voter information cards are cards we send at election time to registered voters only. When a potential elector goes to register themselves, they must sign a statement to the effect that they are a Canadian citizen, age 18 years or older, and the voter information card is not currently accepted as ID. At no time have electors been allowed to vote by showing a voter information card as their only piece of ID. Bill 76, currently before Parliament, would allow the voter information card to be used as proof of address. Elections Canada would not accept the voter information card alone. It would have to be shown with another accepted piece of ID that proves their identity. The voter information card provides access to proof of address. That's all it provides, and that is a very important point. Thank you.
Any further discussion?
Vote.
Recorded vote on CPC 21.
Mr. Biddle.
No.
Monsieur Graham.
No.
Madame Lapointe.
No.
Ms. Sahota.
No.
Mr. Badoy.
No.
Ms. Kuzi.
Oui.
Mr. Nader.
Yes.
Mr. Reid. Mr. Cullen.
No.
It's defeated. Shall Clause 54 carry? On division, shall Clause 55 carry? There was a Clause 55.1, but it's a casualty of NDP 1. So that disappears. There's no amendments from Clauses 56 to 60. The Clause 56 to 60 carry? There's a new Clause 60.1, but it was also a casualty. It was NDP 7. It was also a casualty of NDP 1.
So many casualties. War is brutal, Chair. It's just brutal.
Clause 61, CPC 22. Stephanie.
Chair, was this not scheduled till 7?
Oh, yeah. You want
I know. Yeah.
Hey, we're on a roll.
Well,
Okay, you want to stop now?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone, for making good process and good attitude and good help. Thank you, the officials, for helping us out, being here. We'll see you tomorrow at 9 a.m. and we'll be in room 112 North. Do I have to say anything else? Do I need to say anything else?